This is the Mahabharata podcast, episode 41, The Golden Plough. Last time, we got a little girl talk from Draupadi and Satyabhama. I personally enjoyed her advice for how wives should behave toward their husbands, but I'm sure female listeners were not so enthused. Fresh news made its way to the court of Hastinapur, and the blind King Dhritarashtra reacted with one of his usual laments. He blamed his sons, then blamed himself, and then worried over Arjun's return from heaven. Duryodhana overheard this, and it only served to remind him that not everyone in the world wished him well. To buck him up a bit, Karna suggested they take an armed pleasure junket to watch the Pandavas living in their hobo camp. To get this past the old man, they pretended they were only going on a kind of tax-collecting tour called a cattle expedition. The god Indra got news of the Kauravas' plans, and sent Chitrasena and a legion of Gandharvas to intercept them. Stupidly, Duryodhana picked a fight with them, and only after he was ambushed did he realize his opponents could fly. Even with Karna there to protect them, the Gandharvas made short work of the Kaurava army and took all 100 brothers plus their wives prisoner. I had sort of assumed that Karna was also taken prisoner, because they were all defeated and no specific mention was made of Karna. In later dialogue, it seems that perhaps he got away. It is not made explicit in the text, but I sort of imagine the Gandharvas swooping down and abducting each of the Kauravas plus their wives, while leaving the surviving remnant of the army and Karna free to run away. While the defeat was imminent, the Kaurava camp followers ran to the nearby Pandavas for help. I found Yudhishthira's reasons for helping his cousins interesting. His first reason was that while it was okay to feud with others in your family, once an outsider got involved, then the family should forget their differences and fight as one. Yudhishthira's second reason was more chivalrous. Since the camp followers had come to them for help, as Kshatriyas they had no option but to respond. The Gandharvas ended up paying a high price for their attempted rescue of the Pandavas. For trying to protect the helpless Pandavas, they got nuked by Arjun's Agneya weapon. Fortunately, Indra made all better by sprinkling the famous Amrit, or elixir of immortality, over the battlefield. This revived all the fallen combatants. After Arjun defeated the Gandharvas, the Kauravas were all freed and allowed to return home. The story picks up here, with Duryodhana leading a procession of his brothers from their captivity. Karna, apparently unaware of how they were released, saw them coming and praised them for having fought their way free from their captors. Karna said, "How fortunate that you and all your brothers managed to defeat those Gandharvas and get away. It's amazing no one was hurt. I was put to flight by the Gandharvas, my troops were routed and I could not stop them, and I was swept along with them as they fled. There's no man alive who could accomplish what you just did, breaking free from those flying devils and escaping unhurt." Downcast and tearful, Duryodhana answered his friend, "I don't resent your words, because you don't know what happened. We definitely did our share of killing, but eventually the enemy's magic overwhelmed us, and they snatched us up and flew us away before we could mount a defense. We were taken captive along with our wives. Some survivors ran to the Pandavas, and they came to negotiate our release. When the Gandharvas refused to let us go, a fight broke out. At that point, our captors flew up and dragged us away from the battle. As we looked back, we saw Arjun fire off one of his missiles, killing vast numbers. Finally, their king Chitrasena showed himself to the brothers, cast off his armor, and embraced Dhananjaya as his brother. Once more, Arjun demanded our release. I wish the ground had swallowed me up then, because we were brought out in fetters, and Chitrasena told the Pandavas what we had planned. I was covered with shame. There I stood before my wife and brothers, and now offered to Yudhishthira as his prisoner. What could have been worse than this? The very men whom I had chased away and had always been my enemy had now set me free, and I owe them my life. My only wish is that I had been killed in that battle. I would have gone directly to paradise, and my fame would have been known everywhere. Now I cannot imagine how I could return home to my people after what has happened. I cannot face Bhishma, Drona, Kripa, Vidur, and I do not intend to. You and my brothers should return without me. Dushasan shall be your prince. Forget about me. I intend to starve myself here and now." Miserable Dushasan fell to the ground, weeping at his older brother's resolve, and Karna tried to dissuade his friend. Karna couldn't quite understand what the big deal was. Karna was no slouch when it came to dharma, and so it was perfectly normal that the Pandavas did what they did. They had stuck to their dharma, and that was to be expected. There was no matter for shame or pride here. Furthermore, the Pandavas were living in his kingdom, and all subjects were required to aid their prince. Finally, Karna said, "Look at the Pandavas, living in huts while you enjoy their lands and riches, yet they do not kill themselves. If you still insist on staying here, then I will stay with you. I cannot bear to live, because if you kill yourself, you will be the laughingstock of the subcontinent." Shakuni then spoke up. He agreed with Karna completely, but seeing his nephew was not impressed, he made one more suggestion. He said, "If you cannot bear the shame and would like to even the score, then why don't you just return Indraprastha to the Pandavas?" Duryodhana did not give this suggestion much thought. He just placed his diadem in Dushasan's shaking hands and resolved to die. You might recall that we have seen Duryodhana threaten to kill himself before, but that was only to get something out of his father. This time he really meant it, and it set off alarm bells in the demonic realms. While the prince shed his jewels and silks and sat on a mat to await death, the various Asuras, Daityas, and Danavas held a conference. The denizens of hell all had big plans for Duryodhana and his cousins. They were still upset over the way the gods had tricked them and stolen the Amrit after they had helped out in churning the ocean to create it. From the cosmic perspective, the outcome of this little land dispute would determine whether the gods would continue to maintain their dominance over the three worlds. If Duryodhana backed out now, it would ruin the whole plan. They needed to stop him. Just like the gods, the Asuras also had special Brahmins working for them, and they had their Brahmins put together a sacrificial fire, from which they summoned Kritya, who is described as a wondrous woman with a gaping mouth. The Daityas ordered this creature to fetch Duryodhana for them. Like a genie, Kritya vanished, and in a moment returned again with Duryodhana in tow. The Danavas scolded him for trying to kill himself. They said, "Don't you realize how important you are to us? We made vast sacrifices and performed awesome austerities to create you. It was by Shiva's power that you were made, and you are destined for great things. You think you are human, but you are not. You are divine. You are in no danger, because countless Asuras and Danavas have incarnated as Kshatriya warriors just to serve you. We already have our Asuras lined up to take possession of Bhishma, Drona, Kripa, and the rest. Controlled by the Asuras, these heroes will fight your enemies ruthlessly. Their inner souls overwhelmed, they will pitilessly kill your foes, be they relatives, friends, or children. The great Asura Naraka will lend his power to Karna, and Karna will readily defeat both Krishna and Arjun. In addition, there is a horde of Rakshasas prepared to aid you when the battle comes." The demons then embraced Duryodhana and said, "So have faith, we are all with you in this conflict. If you kill yourself now, all of our plans will be ruined, and you will never see your destined glory." The genie Kritya then picked up the prince and spirited him back to his meditation mat. Duryodhana woke up, thinking it had been a dream, but somehow sure that he should continue living and would see his enemies defeated. Inspired by the Asura Naraka, Karna was present the moment Duryodhana opened his eyes and assured him again that he need not worry about the Pandavas. At the same time, the demonic influence increased a notch among the Kurus, feeding their loyalty to this lost cause. Even Bhishma and Drona began thinking black thoughts about the Pandavas, not knowing that they were being influenced by the dark side. Thus, while not quite knowing the reason why, Duryodhana was again full of pride and arrogance, and returned to his place at the head of the royal procession, returning to Hastinapur like a victorious army. By the time they got back to the palace, Duryodhana was back to his old self. He presented himself to the court. Bhishma must have snapped out of his possession somewhat, because he was not pleased. The old eunuch was exasperated. He questioned Duryodhana, asking, "What is the matter with you? Didn't I warn against this? I heard your king and father command you not to get mixed up with your cousins, and now you come in here like a conquering hero when you just got your butt kicked by hobos and flying monkeys." Duryodhana was not in the mood for a scolding, so he just turned his back on the old man and strode out of court, his cronies all falling in behind him. Feeling humiliated, Bhishma retired from court and went back to stew in his own quarters. Duryodhana, meanwhile, was needing an ego boost, and, thinking back to the glory days of the Pandavas, he suggested that Karna repeat their conquest of the world, and then they could hold their own Rajasuya sacrifice, this time with Duryodhana as the star. Karna was delighted with the idea, but when they consulted their priests, the whole plan was shot down. According to the fine print, there was a limit of 1 Rajasuya per family, so as long as Yudhishthira remained alive, Duryodhana could never enjoy that honor. The priests were eager to please, however, so they consulted their spellbooks and came up with another, equally expensive and extravagant ritual called the Vaishnava sacrifice. The Brahmins assured him that this was really just as cool and as big an honor as the Rajasuya, but the procedure itself was kind of lame. The subject kings of India must send in some gold, which the priests would fashion into a golden plough. Then Duryodhana would use it to plow a sacred enclosure. Perhaps not quite sure if these guys were making fun of him, Duryodhana asked Shakuni and Karna if this sounded acceptable. Of course, those two toadies were all over it, and they encouraged him to go forward with it. Anything to keep the boss's thoughts away from suicide, I guess. Wasting no time, the plow was set up, the food prepared, and messengers were sent to all the kings of India and all the Brahmins to come to witness the rite. Dushasan also sent messengers to the Pandavas, inviting them to come along. When Yudhishthira received the invitation, he politely declined, saying their vow prevented them from entering Hastinapur until the 13 years were over. But rest assured, he said, we will be there as soon as the oath allows it. Still not quite sure if this was improving his image or making him look like a tool, the prince went ahead with the mock farming. Full on his food and drunk on his wine, everyone cheered and honored Duryodhana, but soon the wags of Hastinapur were making jokes about how their king was more of a farmer than a fighter. These jokes got back to the palace, and Karna did his best to keep thin-skinned Duryodhana distracted. He assured his patron that the Vaishnava was a great honor, and besides they will do the Rajasuya soon enough once the Pandavas stick their heads up and get them chopped off. Sensing the darkness coming on, Karna swore an oath to his king. He said, "Hear this, elephant among kings. I shall not wash my feet until Arjun is dead." That's all for now. It's been a while, but we're nearly at the end of the Book of the Forest. Just a few more adventures and we'll be done with Book 3 of the 18. Next time, our heroes are in for a little more hardship as Draupadi is abducted, bringing to mind Sita's experience in the Ramayana. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 42, Kidnapped. Last episode was mostly about Duryodhana's reaction to being humiliated by his defeat and rescue after the cattle expedition. There was a whole scene involving the demonic forces giving a pep talk to their golden boy. In terms of PR, Duryodhana's next move was to hold a Vaishnava sacrifice. All the kings and Brahmins were invited and feasted, but still some wags thought it was funny watching their so-called warrior king walking behind a plow with a team of farting oxen, thigh-deep in shit and fertilizer. Was this a Vaishnava ritual, or just a Vaishya working a plow? Karna, always trying to reassure his patron, was forced to raise the stakes some more. This time he swore an oath not to wash his feet until Arjun was dead. This oath was probably a bad idea, because much later, when the great war is raging at Kurukshetra, and Karna is in command of all the forces, he'll have some trouble with his charioteer. Perhaps the smelly feet had something to do with it. Following Karna's oath of the dirty feet, the scene changes back to the Pandavas in the forest. The brothers are still staying on the shore of Lake Dvaitavana, where the 11th year of exile passed. Soon after, Yudhishthira had a dream. In his dream, a contingent of sobbing deer bowed before him and said that they were the last remnant of the wildlife in this area, and they would soon be extinct if the Pandavas and their followers stayed much longer. They begged Yudhishthira to move his camp elsewhere. Yudhishthira readily agreed to their supplication, and the next morning they broke camp and moved to the Kanyaka woods near Kurukshetra. Perhaps because the time for hiding was drawing near, Vyasa came by to visit the Pandavas early in their 12th year. He wept when he saw how the years had taken their toll on his grandchildren. As you might expect, Vyasa then treated them to a philosophical sermon on their suffering. He said, "One never finds happiness without having suffered. Joy and sorrow must be experienced sequentially. That is the way it works for humanity. A man of vision realizes that luck comes and goes, and he neither celebrates nor mourns." Yudhishthira just loved talking about this kind of stuff, and he had a question ready. He asked, "We are told that austerities and generosity are the best way to earn spiritual merit, but which one is the best?" Vyasa answered, "Nothing on earth is more difficult than giving, because wealth is acquired only by great hardship. Men must go into battle, risk their lives, and suffer to win great wealth, and so to give that up is very difficult. Indeed, it is the greatest of austerities to part with one's honestly won fortune. Even the smallest gift, when given at the right place and time, can have endless rewards in the hereafter. Take, for example, the story of Mudgala. As we've seen throughout the Book of the Forest, Yudhishthira loved stories, so he begged for the complete story of Mudgala and the cup of rice. The story begins with an ascetic who lived off the rice he could find in the fields after the harvest was done. Despite this meager food source, Mudgala managed to feed himself and his wife and still observe sacrifices to the gods, giving them a share of his poor diet. In addition, Mudgala never turned away his guests, no matter how many. There happened to be one of these naked sadhus in the area, named Durvasas. This guy heard of Mudgala's generosity, and, acting like a madman, he came to visit him. Naked and hurling abuses, Durvasis told Mudgala he was hungry. Mudgala took the insults in stride and welcomed his guest with water and what was left of his rice. The madman ate what was offered and demanded more. Mudgala gave his own portion to Durvasis, which he ate, smearing the remains on his face and neck. The lunatic then wandered off, his stomach full and his benefactor starving. The same thing happened the next day. Mudgala spent the morning hunting for fallen rice grains, only to have this naked madman show up at mealtime and eat up all he had. This continued for a total of 6 days, but Mudgala's equanimity was unchanged. Neither happy nor irritated, he fed his obnoxious guest everything he had and then went hungry. Finally, Durvasis shed his disguise and praised Mudgala for his generosity and equanimity. He said, "Congratulations, you have won yourself an express ticket to heaven. Plus, you get to keep your body. This is a great honor." As Durvasis was saying this, a trumpet fanfare blew and a heavenly chariot glided down to pick him up. Mudgala looked admiringly at the chariot and enjoyed the fragrance of the flowers raining down from the sky, but he did not move. Addressing the charioteer, who had just arrived from heaven, Mudgala asked, "Tell me, what is heaven like, really? I'd like to know both the good and the bad." The charioteer obligingly answered him, starting with the high points. He said, "The roads are all well maintained, and everyone gets around with one of these cars. All the liars, louts, and sinners are barred entry. Only the good guys are let in. There is no hunger or thirst or discomfort of any kind. There is no disease nor injustice. No sorrow, no old age. The beauty of your body is born from your past deeds, not from your mother and father. The biggest downside to heaven would have to be the fact that nothing lasts forever. You may have earned yourself an extended stay, but inevitably your time will run out and you'll find yourself back here, a hungry, bald ape harassed by a madman." Durvasis, no longer crazy, was astonished to see Mudgala hesitate before the gates of heaven. But Mudgala had one more surprise. He said, "Thanks, but no thanks. Heaven sounds pretty cool and all, but I'm looking for something a bit more permanent. I'm tired of all these ups and downs, and now I'm ready to check out for good." Thus, Mudgala turned down his chance to heaven and resumed his marginal existence until he finally breathed his last. At that point, he won his desire, total extinction. Vyasa concluded his tale, linking it back to his grandson's situation. He said, "Therefore, child, do not let your grief take hold of you. Just let it pass, knowing that all things must pass, both the good and the bad." Surprisingly, this seems to be the entire purpose of Vyasa's visit, because following this story, he took leave of the Pandavas and returned to his own forest ashram. Like Krishna's visit before the cattle expedition, if Vyasa knew what was going to happen next, he certainly didn't give any prior warning. And after his departure, the brothers went back to their usual hunting forays, with all 5 out in the woods all day, while Draupadi stayed at the camp with their priest Damya. On one of those days, the king of Sindhu, named Jayadratha, rode by the encampment. Jayadratha was actually just passing through on his way to the land of the Shalvas, where he hoped to arrange a marriage for himself. As he drove by the camp, he caught a glimpse of Draupadi standing in the doorway. The king was astonished to see such a beauty living out in obscurity. At first, he suspected she must be a supernatural beauty. Jayadratha summoned one of his toadies to find out more about this woman. He was thinking that perhaps he could skip going to Shalva, since there was a perfectly good, or even better, wife just sitting here in the jungle. The courtier cleverly addressed Draupadi in verse. Using poetic form, he lauded her beauty and questioned her background, using lots of highfalutin references to the Vedas and Puranas. Draupadi answered them, saying, "I know that a woman like me should not even reply, but there is no one else to speak for me, because I am here alone. I know you are Jayadratha of Sindhu, and this courtier is the son of Sarata, a prince named Kotakashya." She continued, "I am King Drupad's daughter, whom the common people call Krishna. I have chosen 5 men to be my husbands, whom you know. My husbands have left briefly on a hunt and shall be back soon. You are welcome to stay here to wait for them. I am sure they would be happy to see you. If I had sound effects, you'd hear scary violin music in the background about right now." Draupadi let the 2 men have a seat and gave them food and drink. Jayadratha confided to his friend that all other women were like monkeys compared to their hostess. He then spoke to Draupadi. He said, "You have been a fine host, but why not come with me now? Jump on my chariot, and you can sleep in a palace this very night. Forget about these Pandavas. You married kings, but they're kings no longer. Consider your marriage annulled and come with me." This was too much for Draupadi, and, expecting the return of her husbands at any moment, subjected her guest to a lengthy tongue-lashing. She threatened them with what her husbands and Krishna would do to him if he tried anything funny. Jayadratha, soon tired of the conversation, grabbed the princess and dragged her to his chariot. Finally, Dhamya heard the ruckus and came on the scene as Jayadratha was carrying Draupadi to his chariot. Ever the good lawyer, Dhamya said, "Wait a minute, this isn't right. You're supposed to first vanquish her husbands before carrying her off. Don't you know the rules?" These raiders had no interest in arguing with the priest, so they ignored him and rode off, back to their kingdom. Helplessly, Dhamya followed behind, citing laws and uttering curses. Meanwhile, the Pandavas found themselves inexplicably disinterested in hunting. They felt an emptiness in their hearts and could only think of returning to the camp. When they got there, they found Draupadi's serving girl weeping and cursing the kidnappers. Briefly, she told them what had happened and who had taken her. Not wasting a moment, the five set off after them, tracking them through the woods. Jayadratha had come in a chariot, but he also had a small bodyguard of foot soldiers and archers, so they moved slowly and left lots of footprints on their trail. The brothers soon caught up with them, and the first person they encountered was Dhamya. The priest pointed excitedly down the road and yelled, "Get them! Attack!" Telling the priest to calm down, the five warriors surged ahead, yelling battle cries so fierce that it stunned the foot soldiers. Draupadi took notice and happily started enumerating her heroic husbands and detailed the kinds of retaliation Jayadratha should expect. The king didn't have long to find out the truth, because the five brothers had already engaged with his bodyguards and were leaving a trail of headless bodies and bodiless heads as they went. Draupadi continued taunting her captor as he watched his buddy Kodakasya pummeled to death by Bhima. That was enough for Jayadratha. His charioteer was shot through with arrows, so the king released Draupadi, kicked the corpse aside, and raced off, thinking only of escape. Draupadi was pretty toughened up after these years of hard living, so she just dusted herself off and urged Bhima and Arjun to race ahead and finish him off. As they each jumped in their chariots, Yudhishthira called to them to bring the malefactor back alive. Bhima had no choice but to obey, but he contented himself with the knowledge that Jayadratha will wish himself dead by the time they got back to Yudhishthira. Before they started forward, Arjun notched 4 arrows to his bow, closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and released the arrows. The 4 arrows soared ahead of them, and each razor-headed shaft killed one of Jayadratha's horses. Now, in utter terror, the king ran on foot into the woods and cringed behind a rock, hoping he would not be discovered. Bhima was an expert tracker, however, and he easily found his quarry. Arjun called out from behind not to kill him, and Bhima commenced beating him. Kicking and punching, he made sure Jayadratha did not lose consciousness. Finally, he bound him up and carried him back to the chariot, where Bhima used a crescent arrowhead to shave Jayadratha's head, leaving just 5 tufts on his battered scalp. Meanwhile, Yudhishthira, Draupadi, and the twins returned to the camp, where they found everything in disarray. Markandeya and the Brahmins had all fled into the woods. As soon as order returned to the camp, Bhima and Arjun arrived with their captive. They all had a good laugh at his appearance, but then Yudhishthira ordered Bhima to release him. Bhima objected, but Yudhishthira explained that their aunt Gandhari was from Sind and was related to the scoundrel. He said, "We owe it to her to spare him his life." Draupadi chimed in, "Set the king's slave free. You have shaved his head down to the 5 tufts." When Jayadratha was released, he bowed to Yudhishthira and the Brahmins in confusion. Yudhishthira said to him, "Go a free man, but never do it again. A curse on you, vile lecher." Then, feeling compassion for this wretch, he said, "May your spirit adhere to Dharma and never turn to lawlessness. Go in peace." Jayadratha was not nearly so forgiving, and not wanting to return home with this appearance, he remained in the wilderness, worshipping Shiva and performing austerities. Eventually, he earned a favor from the great god. Jayadratha asked, "May I vanquish all 5 Pandavas in their chariots?" Shiva replied, "Hold on there. You aren't going to get that much out of me. I'll give you the power to repulse their attacks, except for Arjun. Even the gods have a hard time against him." You can file this story away, because it will come up again when we get to the battle books. That's all for now. Next time, Yudhishthira will seek out Markandeya for solace, and we will get another batch of stories from the famous wise man. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 43, Savitri and Rama. Last episode was yet one more of the Pandavas' tribulations in the forest. This one was especially bad because Draupadi was the primary victim. Jayadratha, the king of Sind, a distant cousin of the Pandavas, spotted Draupadi alone in the woods and abducted her while the Pandavas were out hunting. Their house priest Dhamya objected to Jayadratha's actions, but only on the grounds that he'd failed to first vanquish the Pandavas before taking their wife. If he'd only done that, then he would have been perfectly justified in absconding with Draupadi. By the time the brothers returned, the raiders had already set off. The brothers tracked down their quarry, slaughtered the king's bodyguard, and finally Bhima and Arjun caught up with the fleeing king. Bhima subjected him to a thorough thrashing and gave him a ridiculous haircut, but his life was spared. Jayadratha was Gandhari's relation, and Gandhari was wife to Dhritarashtra, so they had to spare his life. The king of Sind was not nearly so forgiving. In return for the humiliation he suffered at their hands, he performed austerities for Shiva in a quest for revenge. Despite the severity of his yoga, Shiva was not very generous. Jayadratha had demanded the ability to kill all 5 Pandavas, but he ended up settling for being able to slow them up for a while. But Shiva couldn't make any promises about Arjun. Arjun had powerful friends, and Shiva was not interested in provoking them. Following this little interlude, the scene changes back to the Pandavas' camp, where things had settled back to their old routine. Yudhishthira was still broken up about the whole abduction incident. He complained to Markandeya, "Why did Draupadi have to suffer these insults? I have put up with humiliation and violence, and every time I did the right thing. Even when everyone else thought I was crazy, I stuck to my dharma and did what was right. Despite all the virtue I have earned, why must Draupadi, who is innocent of everything, be subject to such bad treatment? Has anyone had it as bad as I do now?" Markandeya's reply is quite amazing. He literally broke into the story of Rama Dasharati, telling the complete tale of the Ramayana. This is justified by the relation Draupadi's abduction had to Sita's experience in the Ramayana, but is a pretty extravagant response, I think. I apologize if any listeners are disappointed, but I'm going to skip this Markandeya story. It literally covers the entire story of the Ramayana. Probably weeks after getting Markandeya started on the Ramayana, Yudhishthira complained again. He said, "I don't grieve so much about myself or my brothers, but rather Drupad's daughter. When we were lost in slavery, it was she who bought our freedom, and now she was kidnapped by Jayadratha. Has there ever been a woman who is as devoted to her husband and as great as Drupad's daughter?" Markandeya said, "Hear, king, of the greatness of noble-born women. All this was achieved by the princess Savitri." The tale began with a king of the Madras named Ashvapati. He was a gentle and kind king with a happy kingdom, but he had no children. He became worried as he and his wife grew older, so he lived by a strict vow of starvation and celibacy. I'm not sure how he expected this to aid his fertility, but it certainly didn't help for the first 18 years of this lifestyle. Finally, on the 18th year, the goddess Savitri came down as a messenger of grandfather. Ashvapati asked her for a child, and she promised him a daughter. Some more time passed, and, perhaps realizing that if he wanted this child, he'd better do something about it, Ashvapati finally had sex with his wife, and this time the arrow hit its target, and she got pregnant. As promised, the queen had a girl, and they named her Savitri after the heavenly messenger. She grew up to be a brilliantly beautiful woman. She got to be too beautiful. So beautiful that men were intimidated by her. The old king was not getting any younger, yet he couldn't find a man to inherit his estate. The guys were all just spooked by her good looks. Finally, running out of options, the king resorted to a sort of improvised Swayamvara. He threw her out of the palace and ordered her to go find a husband, and don't come back until you have one. Obediently, the girl set out into the wide world in a quest for her husband. She rode on a chariot and was chaperoned by a crew of royal counselors. Meanwhile, her father the king received a special visitor. It was the sage Narada. I suppose Narada could have been there for quite a while, telling gossip, but he was still there when Savitri returned from her quest. The girl presented herself to the king and then bowed to Narada. Narada naturally was curious about the girl's mission and asked the king why she wasn't married. King Ashvapati said, "That's exactly the reason I sent her out. She's just returned, so let's see what she came up with." Savitri began by describing a king from the land of the Shalvas named Dyumatsena. She said this king did not have a son until he was quite old, and when the boy was young, Dyumatsena lost his eyesight. Taking advantage of his infirmity, one of his neighboring kings invaded his kingdom and drove blind Dyumatsena and his family off their land. His son is named Satyavat, and he lives with his parents as an ascetic in the jungle. I have chosen Satyavat to be my husband. Narada gasped in shock at her pronouncement. He said, "Whoa, this girl's making a big mistake. I know this family. Both the mother and father are good people, and the boy is named Satyavat by the Brahmins because of his truthfulness." The king asked, "So how is his personality? Is he wise and generous?" Narada replied yes to all the above, so the king pressed him. If he's so great as you say, why shouldn't he marry my daughter? Narada said, he has just this one flaw. In 1 year he'll be a dead man. The king stood up and said, Go, Savitri, go now and find yourself a new man. Narada predicts he will be dead in a year, so you better believe it. Saddened but obstinate, Savitri said, Some things happen only once in life, and one of those is when a woman chooses her husband. I have chosen, and I shall not choose again. Narada couldn't say better than that, so he endorsed her decision and advised the king to do the same. The king said, I shall do as you say, for you are my guru. Wishing them good luck in this venture, Narada then shot up into the sky, returning to heaven, presumably to gossip among the devas about these doomed lovers. While questioning the utility of going through with such elaborate ceremonies for an impoverished son-in-law who was not long for life, the king commenced planning for the wedding. Putting together a fancy wedding party, the father and daughter set off to meet with the groom's family. Blind, impoverished King Dyumatsena greeted the royals and respectfully offered them seats. Once they were settled, the host asked, So what can I do for you? King Ashvapati said, This is my daughter Savitri. According to custom, take her from me as your daughter-in-law. Dyumatsena demurred. He said, We are fallen on hard times and live like sadhus. How could this princess bear the hardship of life with us? Ashvapati replied, My daughter knows as well as I that sorrow and happiness are temporary. She has made up her mind. Dyumatsena didn't need much convincing. I'm only guessing, but I bet Savitri's dowry was sufficient to buy them a few choice amenities, like maybe a Greek slave or two. Thus, joyously, Ashvapati unloaded his daughter and her dowry and returned home. Savitri, for her part, entered her husband's compound, leaving her jewelry at the gate, and changed out of her silks to don tree bark. Adapting quickly, she soon fell into their routine of austerities. All the time, however, she kept thinking of Narada's prophecy. The year passed quickly in this same peaceful routine, until just a few days were left before her husband's expected death. Savitri still had not told them what she knew, but as the date neared, she undertook a fast in which she stayed standing continuously for 4 days, with the fast ending on the day of Satyavat's death. The family all thought that this was a bit harsh, but they did these sorts of things all the time, so no one questioned her. Finally, on the morning of Satyavat's death, her oath came to an end. Savitri's mother-in-law suggested she rest and eat something to break her fast. Just then, Satyavat walked by with an axe and declared he was going out to gather wood for the Agnihotra sacrifice. Quickly calculating that he probably would not be returning alive, Savitri jumped up and asked to accompany him. Pointing out that this was the first time she had left the compound since she arrived the year before, her in-laws allowed Savitri to go along with Satyavat into the woods. They just told her patronizingly, But see to it you don't distract Satyavat along the way. Sleep-deprived and weak from hunger, Savitri accompanied her husband as he gathered wood. Relishing every last moment with her beloved, she marveled at the beauty she saw all around her. Satyavat was splitting firewood when the preordained time came. He suddenly dropped his axe and said, I suddenly feel sick. I need to sit down. Savitri ran to her husband as he collapsed and lay next to him, her head in his lap. Not long after, Savitri saw a man approaching. This guy wore yellow robes and a yellow turban, had black skin and red eyes. He carried a noose in his right hand. As he approached, Savitri stood up and bowed to him. She said, I can tell you are God, so please tell me who you are and what's your business. The god said, Because you are such a devoted wife and have such spiritual power, I will tell you, I am Yama. Your husband's time has come. I would normally send one of my flunkies to fetch him, but Satyavat was so virtuous and good that I've come in person for him. You should be honored. Now step aside while I do my thing. With those words, Yama plunged his fist into Satyavat's chest and withdrew a thumb-sized homunculus, a little man that was Satyavat's soul. Slipping his noose over the little fellow, Yama turned to go. I'm sure most of us would not have even glimpsed Yama while he performed his duty. But by now, Savitri had become quite spiritually powerful. So Yama thought he had vanished from her sight, and he began heading back to the netherworld. When he looked behind him, however, there was Savitri, tagging along. Still polite, but getting irritated, Yama said, Go back, you are done here. He's dead, now find someone else. Savitri responded, saying that it was a woman's eternal right to stay by her husband's side, and no one could dispute that. Yama said, Hear, hear, that is well said indeed. I'll grant you a wish, accepting this man's life. Savitri then asked for her father-in-law to regain his eyesight. Yama said, Consider it done. Now, how about you go home now? You look tired. Savitri replied, "How could I be tired when I'm with my beloved? I'm going wherever he goes." Yama then offered her a second wish, in which she requested her father-in-law's kingdom be returned. Savitri also asked that her father might have 100 sons. This was granted, and she then asked that she also would have 100 sons, and this too was granted. Apparently, what Yama liked about her was her philosophizing, so she hit him with one more sermon. She said, "The faithful always abide by Dharma. The faithful do not worry or despair. The faithful lead the sun by their truth, and their penance holds up the earth. The faithful help others without expecting anything in return." Yama ate this up. He praised her again, saying, "You speak so well, so meaningfully. I just love it. Go ahead, make another wish." She got him this time. She said, "You didn't put any conditions on this one, so I'll take my husband back. Thank you very much." Yama was a good sport, and he granted her wish, and also gave them both lifespans of 400 years. Soon after, Satyavata awoke with Savitri by his side. He did not remember anything, just that he'd had a headache and had laid down to rest. It was quite late by now, and the jackals were crying all around, so Savitri did not explain. The pair carefully made their way home. Back at the camp, the old man had suddenly regained his eyesight. Not knowing the cause of this, their first thought was of their son. They grew quite worried when it got dark and the couple had still not returned. As the camp Brahmins fired up the scheduled Agnihotra, they reassured the old couple that such a virtuous couple could not come to harm. Sometime after midnight, Savitri and Satyavat returned home. Satyavat explained that he'd fallen sick and thus they were late. It was then that he recalled a strange dream he had, where his wife was negotiating for his very soul. The girl's austerities, the old man's vision, and this dream were too much for one coincidence, so they all demanded an explanation from Savitri. Honestly, the girl told them about Narada's prediction, her vow, Satyavat's death, and her bargains with Yama. She then told them what they might expect, hundreds of sons, and the return of the kingdom. Just as she finished, a messenger from the Shalvas arrived with urgent news. King Dyumatsena's usurper was dead. There had been a palace coup in which a minister had assassinated the entire royal family and seized control. The people rose up in anger and in turn deposed the minister. Now the throne was open and Dyumatsena was welcomed by the people. Not long after, both Savitri and her mother became pregnant and had sons. Somehow the two unfortunate ladies went on to have 100 sons each. Markandeya concluded this story, saying, "Thus Savitri by her toils saved her family. Likewise the auspicious Draupadi shall rescue all of you." Remember, Vaisampayana is narrating the whole story, and he also chimed in, concluding the chapter. Vaisampayana said, "Thus did the great-spirited Markandeya pacify the Pandava, and they went on to live in Kanyaka woods without sorrow or fear." That's all for now. Next episode, we'll get back to the Karna story, which we haven't heard much since the first book. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 44, Karna Cuts a Deal. It's been a while, but last episode contained the final Markandeya session. We're also quite near the end of Book 3 and the end of the Pandavas' 12th year of exile. I ended up skipping Markandeya's unabridged telling of the Ramayana. It seems a bit like gilding the lily to stick an epic inside your epic. So maybe in a future life I'll do a Ramayana podcast, but not now. At this point, frankly, I can't see past the Bhagavad Gita. Regarding the story of Savitri, I seem to recollect a version of this in which Savitri has sex with the corpse of her husband. I referred to my electronic version of the Ganguly translation, and this whole section of the book was missing. This is going to be a bigger problem as we go along because my print translation by Van Buitenen only goes up to Book 5. After that, I will be completely dependent on the Ganguly translation. The problem is that I do not yet have a print version of Ganguly. I searched Amazon.com and they're selling the complete set for $350. I did not start this podcast with the intention of making money, but that is quite an expense for someone who's trying to do a good deed. If any of you out there happen to have a spare copy of the Ganguly translation or know where to find a cheaper edition, please contact me at mahabharatapodcast.com. Thanks for your help. The next chapter, 43, picks up with the story of Karna and his earrings. The chapter begins with a dialogue between King Janamejaya and Vaisampayana. You may recall that the entire Mahabharata is presented as a dialogue in which Vyasa's disciple Vaisampayana recites a story to Arjun's great-grandson Janamejaya. In this chapter, Janamejaya recalls a promise Lomasha had made to Yudhishthira when Arjun was away in heaven. At that time, Arjun had been lounging in paradise while his brothers were living in holes in the ground. Indra, sensing the brothers' growing anxiety, sent the sage Lomasha to visit them and give them a message. Janamejaya recalled that Indra, speaking through Lomasha, had promised Yudhishthira that not only would Arjun soon return, but Indra would also, quote, take away that bitter fear that you never talk about. Janamejaya wanted to know, what was this fear? Was it Karna? And were they really afraid to talk about it? Vaisampayana said, at the end of their 12th year in exile, Indra decided to do the Pandavas a favor. Karna was famous for two things, his unlimited generosity and his magic earrings and armor. Since it has been a while since we really talked about Karna, and not all of you already know this story by heart, here's a quick refresher on him. The Pandavas' mother, Kunti, was originally known as Pritha. Her father, Sura, was Vasudeva's father as well. Vasudeva was Krishna's father, hence Kunti was Krishna's aunt. When she was still a girl, Sura gave Pritha up to his cousin Kunti Bhoja, who adopted her as his child, he being otherwise childless. While still a maiden, her stepfather hosted the sage Durvasas, and he assigned Kunti to see to his comforts. I don't know if this was the same Durvasas we met in the story of Mudgala, but that guy was creepy. He pretended to be crazy, ate up a starving man's meals, and smeared the leftovers on his body. I think it probably is the same guy, because in the story of Kunti, they describe him as, quote, a dreadful Brahmin whose decisions on Dharma were mysterious, unquote. That sounds like our guy. My guess is that sadly an all too common event took place. A young girl living in a strange household with her family all far away gets taken advantage of by a slightly crazy older man. In this darker, more human drama, I imagine Mad Durvasas telling her it was a magic ritual and her secret child was semi-divine. The story as it came down to us was a little more epic. It still involved a youthful indiscretion, but it preserves Durvasas' good reputation. We are told that, for her good services to the sage, Durvasas granted Kunti a mantra that would enable her to summon any god and beget a child by him. The next chance she had, the girl tried it out and summoned Surya, the sun god. The god appeared, and he was ready for business. There was no turning back now, but Surya did her the favor, preserving her virginity. In a single day, Kunti conceived and gave birth to a boy, as resplendent as his father, who would be known as Karna. The child was born with earrings and armor, both of which granted him immunity from physical harm. Quickly, to avoid any question regarding her virtue, Kunti placed the baby in a basket and floated it down the river. The boy was adopted by a Sutta, or half-caste charioteer. Thus, despite his kingly bearing and his fantastic skill at arms, Karna was shunned by the Kshatriya caste as a commoner. Burning with resentment, Karna broke in on Arjun's coming-out party and upset all the fun. Duryodhana was happy to see anyone make a fool out of Arjun, so he quickly allied himself with the newcomer. To seal the friendship, Duryodhana made Karna the king of Anga. At the time, Duryodhana was just one prince among many, so where he got the spare kingdom and title to just give away like that is kind of a mystery. Thus Karna was in many respects redeemed. With a title and a kingdom, he outranked most Kshatriyas. But still, everyone knew he was only an honorary Kshatriya, and that he would forever be low-born. This nagging doubt was just the thing to keep him on Duryodhana's side. And with his magical accoutrements, he could even pose a threat to the mighty Arjun. Thus, as the 12th year of the Pandavas' exile came to a close, Indra started thinking about his boy Arjun's prospects in the coming battle. The god decided, on his own initiative, to take away Karna's best asset, his magic armor. By this time, Karna had grown quite wealthy, and he was famous for his generosity. He declared that he would never turn down any request, no matter how extravagant. It was based on this boast that Indra devised a plan. He planned to come to Karna disguised as a Brahmin and to request Karna's armor. I don't know if Indra bragged about this to his buddies or what, but somehow Surya got wind of his plans, and he went to warn his son. The sun god appeared to Karna in a dream and told him what Indra was planning. It beseeched Karna to offer the beggar anything, but just do not give up those earrings. He said, "Those jewels are formed from the Amrit of immortality. If you lose those, you will be susceptible to death. Do anything for Indra, but do not give them away." Karna was very respectful to this deity, but did not recognize him as his father. He said, "Everyone everywhere knows of my generosity. If Indra asks for my armor, I shall certainly give it to him, because I would much rather die in glory than to live on in ignominy. To give generously to a Brahmin is the greatest merit. How much greater when that Brahmin is Indra in disguise. To him I would freely give my life." Realizing he'd lost this argument, Surya backed down a bit and offered a suggestion. One of the great things about making offerings to gods is that you get to ask for something in return. Thus Surya advised Karna that he should request a weapon from Indra, one that is powerful enough to defeat the Pandavas. Karna woke up at dawn with this dream still fresh in his memory. His routine was to bathe and to worship the sun until high noon, after which he gave freely to any supplicant, particularly Brahmins. This particular day, a Brahmin approached him, and Karna recalled the dream he'd just had. The Brahmin said, "Give me alms." Karna said, "You are welcome. What would you like? I'll give you slave girls and the income from a few villages." The Brahmin said, "I do not want women or money. What I want from you is your armor and earrings. Cut them off and give them to me, if you're a man of your word." Karna said, "Come on, I'll give you gold, food, money, women, whatever you want, but I still need these earrings." Karna went on to explain that with these magical articles, he was invulnerable to attack. No one could kill him so long as he kept these endowments. The Brahmin, however, was insistent. Realizing that the game was up, Karna began to laugh. He said, "You don't fool me. I know you are Indra in disguise. I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you my precious earrings and armor, but you know the rules. Gods always must give something better in return. Otherwise, the deal's off." Indra said, "Okay, you got me. I guess you've been palling around with Surya, eh? I bet he told you I was coming. But very well, you know my armory, so besides my thunderbolt, choose a weapon." Happily, Karna picked out the never-failing spear, which kills masses of enemies on the battlefield. Indra handed over the spear, telling him, "Give me your armor, and I'll give you the spear. You can use it to kill hundreds of your enemies, or you can use it to kill just one superhero. But just be warned, it is only good for one shot. After you fire it, it will return to my hand." Karna replied, "No problem, there's only one guy I'm gunning for, and this will do just the trick." Indra warned Karna that Arjun had powerful friends, and with Krishna around he shouldn't expect too much. But Karna was evidently satisfied with the bargain, and he used a knife to slice off his earrings, and then proceeded to flay the armor off his body. Noticing the gory mess that was becoming Karna's body, Indra offered one more favor. He gave Karna his good looks back, ensuring that not a scar was left on him from this feat. Thus the trade was made. Karna handed over his accoutrements, still hot and bloody, while he in turn took up Indra's magic spear. Vaisampayana finishes up this little vignette, describing how news of Karna's mutilation cast doubt and confusion among the Kurus, while the Pandavas were much relieved. For whatever reason, we're also told that the Pandavas made one last move before going into hiding. This time they returned to Lake Dvaitavan, where they had one last adventure. Shortly after settling down at this lakeside ashram, a Brahmin came running to the Pandavas in a flat panic. This guy was out meditating and doing yoga, and had hung his fire-starting kit in a tree. When he wasn't paying attention, a buck came by and rubbed his antlers on that tree. In the process, he managed to tangle the satchel in his horns, and then the buck ran off with it. In them days, a Brahmin who couldn't start a ritual fire was pretty useless, so this guy was desperate. Yudhishthira, of course, was keenly interested in the welfare of his Brahmin friends, so all 5 Pandavas set off at once in search of the Brahmin's kit. The 5 brothers set off together, tracking the deer deeper into the woods. This clever buck managed to elude them all day, until, as the sun set and the skies grew dark, they finally gave up the chase. Tired and dejected, they sat down to rest. Nakul started to grumble at their colossal bad fortune. He complained, "We're all good people. No one does anything sinful or immoral in our camp. So why must we go through this all the time?" Yudhishthira chided him, reminding the boy that bad luck visits all mortals regardless of their virtue. Bhima grumbled, "If only I'd killed Dushasan the moment he laid hands on Draupadi, we wouldn't be sitting here right now." Arjun then chimed in, "If only I'd killed Karna for the harsh words he spoke." Then Sahadev added, "And I should have taken down Shakuni for cheating at dice." Changing the subject before Nakul could add his 2 cents, Yudhishthira said, "Hey Nakul, it looks like there should be some water nearby. How about bringing us a drink?" Obediently, Nakul got up and went in search of water. Perhaps 100 meters from the rest of his brothers, he came across a pond of clear blue water. By now parched with thirst, he knelt down to drink. Just then, a voice came out of nowhere that said, "This is my property. Do not drink until you have answered my questions." Unheeding, Nakul bent down and drank. As soon as the water went down his throat, he collapsed. Around the same time, Yudhishthira was getting impatient. He ordered Sahadev to fetch the water and bring Nakul back. Sahadev quickly found the pond and also spotted his brother dead on the beach. Now burning with thirst, Sahadev grieved for his brother, but first needed a drink. Again, the voice calmly warned him not to drink, but Sahadev paid no mind. Soon he too was dead on the shore. Yudhishthira was still more irritated than concerned, so again he sent off the youngest remaining brother to fetch water and his prodigal brothers. Arjun picked up his magic weapons and searched for the brothers Madreya. He soon spied the two boys, lying dead on the waterline. Tearfully he called out, challenging whoever killed his brothers to come out and fight. No enemy emerged for Arjun to fight. Only a disembodied voice spoke. It said, "Back away from the water. Do not drink until you first answer some questions." Arjun raged through his tears. "Do not be a coward. Show yourself if you seek to threaten me." Angrily he fired magic arrows in all directions, hoping to smoke out his prey. Still calm and quiet, the voice charted Arjun. "Nice shooting, Flyboy, but it does no good. Keep away from the water if you know what's good for you. Why won't you talk to me?" Lost in grief and sorrow, Arjun was also uncontrollably thirsty. Ignoring the strange voice, he fell on his knees and drank deeply. Then he died. Perversely, Yudhishthira was still not getting suspicious. He just threw his last living brother right into the breach after the rest. Thus Bhimasena went off looking for water. Like the others, he saw his brothers all lying dead by the water, but unlike Arjun, he did not get emotional. He calculated that he was about to join the fight of his life, so he prepared his weapons and took a drink. Bhima didn't even notice the quiet voice trying to warn him off and start conversation. He just took a big drink and fell dead. Only now that he was all alone did Yudhishthira finally think to get up off his lazy ass and find out what happened to his brothers. After tracking their various paths, he was finally led to the shoreline where he saw his siblings lying dead in a row. Never one to get consumed with passion, Yudhishthira began thinking. He pondered what type of being could have finished off these powerful and well-connected heroes, and not make a noise or even leave a mark on their bodies. He knew it could not be an ordinary enemy, and he couldn't imagine even an ally of the Kurus capable of this feat. While all this was running through his head, Yudhishthira also felt an uncontrollable thirst, and plunged into the water to take a drink. Once again the creature spoke up. It said, "I am just a crane who eats duckweed and fish, and this is my pool. It belongs to me, and you may not drink without my permission. If you'll answer my questions, then you may drink." Yudhishthira refrained from drinking, but he was skeptical. He pointed out that his brothers were safe from even asuras and gods, so how could this possessive duck do so much damage? The bird said, Okay, I'm not a crane. I'm actually a yaksha, but I did indeed fell those brothers of yours." The yaksha then revealed himself. This was no genial leprechaun here. This yaksha is described as odd-eyed, big-bodied, tall as a palm tree, fiery like the sun, and massive as a mountain. The yaksha said, "This water is mine. All those guys tried to drink, so I killed them. I did warn them first, but did they listen?" Yudhishthira kept his cool. He said, "All right, I don't take what isn't freely given. So, what are your questions?" The yaksha asked, "What makes the sun, moon, and planets move in the sky?" Yudhishthira answered, "Brahman holds all things. The gods fly around with them, and Dharma sets their course." The yaksha then asked, "How about Kshatriyas? What is their guiding principle? What makes them human? And what is the worst thing they can do?" Yudhishthira answered, "Weapons are the guiding principle of the warrior caste. Fear makes them human, and the worst thing they can do is desert an ally or subordinate in their time of need." Next question. What is greater than the earth? What is higher than heaven? What is faster than the wind? What is more numerous than man? He answered, "Mothers are greater than the earth. Fathers are higher than heaven. Mind is faster than wind, and worries are more numerous than men." Question. What is the greatest of riches? What is the greatest possession? What is the greatest boon? And what is the greatest comfort? Yudhishthira's answer, ability is the greatest of riches. Learning is the greatest possession. Good health is the greatest boon, and contentment is the greatest comfort. This is just a sampling of the entire Q&A session, but I'll spare you the rest. Many either don't make much sense or failed in translation. In any case, Yudhishthira was good at this kind of thing, and he passed with flying colors. The yaksha was delighted with his answers, but remained stingy. He offered Yudhishthira the life back of just one of his brothers. He asked Yudhishthira to choose which one. Yudhishthira had his answer ready. He chose Nakula. "Nakula," the yaksha exclaimed, "why on earth would you pick that little guy over his heroic elder brothers?" The answer should have been obvious. Yudhishthira said, "I chose Nakula because he is Madri's eldest son. My mother Kunti shall still have a son, but without Nakula, Madri will have no heir to follow her. To do otherwise would be heartless and cruel, and this I cannot do." The yaksha liked this answer. He said, "You chose to forsake your future glory and wealth just to avoid being cruel to your dead stepmother. That's pretty awesome. For that I shall give you the lives of all your brothers." As soon as he said it, the 4 Pandavas all rose up at once. All fatigue and thirst was gone. Yudhishthira began thinking over all that happened, and he had some questions of his own. He said, I'm having a hard time accepting that you are really a yaksha. So tell me really, are you Rudra or perhaps Indra? My brothers here have taken on the toughest guys around. They eat yakshas for breakfast, but you've given them their lives back as easily as you took it away. Are you our father?" Finally, the creature came clean. He said, "I am indeed your begetter. I am the Lord Dharma, your father. I kept hearing Indra brag about how great Arjun was, and of course you were famous for your goodness, so I figured I'd test you out a bit. You did well, my boy, so let me grant you a wish. What do you desire?" Yudhishthira said, "All I'd like is to get that damned fire kit back for that Brahmin." Dharma replied, "Actually, I took that kit so I could get you out here. The Brahmin already recovered it and is happily starting fires for everyone. Choose another wish." Yudhishthira said, "Well, we're about to enter our year of hiding. How about ensuring that we don't get found out?" Dharma answered, "It shall be so. No matter what disguise you choose for yourselves, no one will see through it until your year of hiding is over. You may rest assured." The god then blessed his sons and left them to plan out their next move. Thus ends Book 3 of the Mahabharata, called the Book of the Forest. Next time, we'll get started on the next stage in the story, the Pandavas' year in hiding. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, Episode 45, the Book of Virata. Last time, we finished up Book 3 with 2 of the more famous tales from the Mahabharata. We started with a refresher on Karna's background, then went into the story of how Indra played on Karna's famous generosity to take away the earrings and armor that protected him from harm. Karna got a magic spear in return for his sacrifice, and he was happy with the bargain. Karna is possibly the most complex character in the entire epic. He is a perfect warrior. His loyalty, generosity, valor, and virtue are all as great as any other character in the story. And this is fitting since he's the 6th Pandava after all. What is confusing is that Karna manages to possess all these great qualities, while at the same time he's full of resentment and rage. The final story of Book 3 is a sort of necessary prelude to the Book of Virata. In it, Yudhishthira is tested by his father Dharma, and conveniently he's granted the boon that he and his brothers need not worry about getting identified during the year of hiding. Book 4, the Book of Virata, begins with the Pandavas in the Dvaita woods, planning their next move. Yudhishthira asked Arjun to suggest some countries they could hide out in. Arjun suggested some interesting ones, like Panchala, the land of Draupadi's father, Shalva, whose king they had recently warred with, Chedi, whose king was killed by Krishna at Yudhishthira's Rajasuya, and Matsya. Arjun does not explain why he thought these would be safe and friendly places of refuge. Instead, Yudhishthira simply selected the final option, Matsya. Matsya, whose king was Virata, was located in the modern-day province of Rajasthan. Having dictated which country would be the refuge, Yudhishthira asked his brothers what disguises they each would take. Yudhishthira said he would be the royal dicing master, a Brahmin named Kanka. He would tell the king that he had once been a friend of Yudhishthira's. Bhima then said that he would serve as the king's cook, called Balava. On the side, he could entertain the king as a wrestler and strongman. Arjun then offered to be a hermaphrodite. Her name would be Brihanala, which translates roughly as woman with a large penis. He had trained at dance with Chitrasena himself, so he would be the women's dance teacher. In comparison with the 3 Kanteyas' flamboyant disguises, the younger 2 twins took on more humble roles. Nakula would be master of horse, called Grantika, and Sahadev would be a humble cowherd, Tantipal. Finally, Draupadi volunteered to be handmaid to Virata's queen. Now that the disposition of the royals was established, Yudhishthira turned to the next in rank, their house priest Damya. He ordered the Brahmin to go to Panchala and work for King Drupad until they were free again. As for the rest of the hangers-on, he sent his charioteers and horsemen to Dvarka and sent the rest to Panchala. Responding to this drastic turning of the tables, Damya asked permission to teach them of the perils of a courtier's life. Their priest then gave them a brief lecture on how to avoid making enemies at court and how to best please the king. I'm sure it was some useful advice for folks living in medieval times, but I'll spare you the details. Here are a few samples. Damya said, never offer advice to the king when he does not ask for it. When there's something funny, don't laugh too loud, nor should you keep silent. Be sure to sneeze, fart, and clear your throat quietly. Yudhishthira thanked Dhamya for the advice, and lest others presume to lecture their king, he added, "Only you, Kunti, and Vidur may speak to us like this." The group then parted ways, with some heading for Panchala, others for Dwarka, and the Pandavas heading to Matsya. The brothers followed the Yamuna River westward towards Rajasthan, and then continued west once the river veered to the north. They hunted as they traveled, and presented themselves as hunters to anyone they met. Soon they reached the outskirts of Virata's capital. At the edge of the city there was a cremation ground. Arjun suggested they wrap their weapons as if they were a corpse and hang it in a tree near the ghat. Nakul obligingly climbed up the tree and hung all their collected weapons high up in the branches, where no self-respecting Hindu would go snooping around. Just as added security, they picked up a convenient corpse that was laying around and hung it next to the false package. The smell would be enough to keep people away from that tree. As a final secret precaution, before entering the city, Yudhishthira gave his brothers fictitious secret names. They would be called Jaya, Jayanta, Vijaya, Jayatsena, and Jayadbala respectively. Of course, being secret, no one would use them, except in an extreme situation. The brothers then broke up, donned their disguises, and filed into King Virata's palace. Yudhishthira, of course, was the first to present himself. As he entered the court, he struck everyone with his royal comportment, but when he told them he was a Brahmin gambler, they accepted his story without question. I get the impression that Virata was a wealthy cattle baron living on the outskirts of civilized society, so he was delighted to take in refugees from what was the hippest court in the world, Indraprastha. Thus, Yudhishthira was welcomed and given an honorable position in Virata's court. As soon as Kanka had been established at the court and given his position, another refugee from Indraprastha entered the court. Bhima approached the king carrying a spoon, a ladle, and a black iron sword, which presumably were the accoutrements of an ancient chef. The king was greatly impressed with this man's bearing as well, and he introduced himself as Balava, the former cook for the Pandavas. Although he felt Balava must be qualified for greater things, the king was happy to take on this cook, so Balava was set up in the royal kitchens. The next visitor to the court was Draupadi. It says she came in the guise of a chambermaid, with her hair perfectly braided and covered. Presumably because of her low-born status, or perhaps because she was a woman, she did not follow her husbands into the open court. Instead, she got herself noticed by the staff, and they asked her what she wanted. She told them she was a chambermaid looking for work. Her looks, bearing, and speech soon attracted the notice of Virata's queen, Sudeshna. The queen had her summoned and quizzed her. The queen asked, "Who are you, and what is your purpose?" Draupadi answered, "I have come as a Sairandri chambermaid. I want to work for anyone who will feed me." The queen was suspicious. She said, "I've never seen a Sairandri that looks like you. Honestly, are you a goddess, an apsara?" Draupadi stuck to her story, telling the queen that she was skilled in hairdressing, garland making, ointment mixing, and that she had learned her skills at the palaces of Dwarka and Indraprastha. The queen said, "My dear, I would hire you right this minute, but look at you. Even the serving women are too distracted to do their work. The second my husband sees you, he'll throw me over and make you his queen. It would be suicidal for me to take you on." Draupadi had a solution for this as well. She said, "Not Virata, nor any other man can hurt me at all. I have 5 young Gandharvas for husbands, and they are all the sons of the king of the Gandharvas. My husbands allow me to serve in a house where I do not eat leftovers and I do not wash men's feet. Any man who covets me like a commoner will not live to see the next day." That was enough to satisfy the queen, and she contentedly took Draupadi into her service. The next 2 Pandavas to get a job were Nakul and Sahadev. They got the king's attention when he was out reviewing his livestock, and the pair each got their respective jobs, tending horses and cattle. The last of the Pandavas to get a job was Arjun. He entered the king's court as a woman, hair combed out and unbraided, and sporting giant hoop earrings. The spectacle of this massively manly woman took the king aback. He addressed this creature, saying, "Surely you're no woman. You're better endowed than any man in this court. If you only have the right attributes, I'm ready to hand the kingdom over to you right now. Who are you really?" Arjun replied, "My story is a sad one. I won't trouble you with the details, but I'll say that my parents abandoned me as both their son and their daughter." She went on, "You can call me Brihanala. I am skilled in dance and music. Allow me to be your daughter's dance teacher." Virata still felt this hermaphrodite would make a better general than a music master, but he agreed to hire on Brihanala as his daughter's teacher. Thus the Pandavas settled into their new life of servitude. We are told that they all prospered in their occupations and helped each other when they could. After living like this for 4 months, the king hosted a regional wrestling tournament. Big men came from all corners of India to display their strength. Virata asked his cook to participate in the contest, so Ballava had little choice but to obey, although he worried they might be found out. Ballava fought and won every round until by the end of the tourney he had defeated every challenger. Virata was overjoyed at this, rewarding his cook generously. Yet he never suspected that he had the famous Pandava performing for him. Following the tournament, Ballava did less cooking and more fighting. He often fought elephants and tigers for the king's entertainment. And that was the best use King Virata could make of his illustrious protégés. He never suspected anything. This went on swimmingly for a span of 10 months. With just a few months of hiding to go, Draupadi ran into some trouble. It says she was pretty miserable working for Virata's wife, Queen Sudeshna. Matters were made worse because of Sudeshna's brother Vichaka. It appears that Virata was not a very warlike fellow, so he depended heavily on a half-caste marshal named Vichaka to keep him safe from invasion and secure on his throne. He obviously needed Vichaka badly enough that he took Vichaka's sister to be his queen. Poor Draupadi was stuck combing the hair of a woman who could barely qualify to be a serving girl at Indraprastha. Being an uncouth Suta, Vichaka wandered freely in the queen's quarters and ogled Draupadi openly. Vichaka spoke to Sudeshna about her handmaid and got the full story from her. He asked Sudeshna and received permission to approach this girl. Vichaka begged Draupadi to come away with him. He offered to throw out all his other wives if she would agree to be his main squeeze. Draupadi was polite, but she got her point across. She said, "Son of a Suta, you have designs on the wrong person. I am a lowly hairdresser, far beneath your exalted dignity. You should never set your mind on another's wife. My husbands are Gandharvas, and they will strike you down in their wrath. Give up on this venture now." Thus spurned, Vichaka let her be, but he could not get over his dangerous obsession. He repeatedly begged his sister to help arrange something, saying he could not go on living without this girl. Vichaka was the marshal of the Matsyas, and had raised his entire clan to the level of royalty, so Sudeshna again gave in to her lascivious brother. This time, on a local holiday, Vichaka had prepared plates of meat and bottles of wine. Sudeshna ordered her handmaid to go to Vichaka's palace and pick up some of these delicacies. Draupadi was scandalized. She said, "You cannot send me alone to that man's quarters. You know he has evil intentions. Did we not have an agreement about this when you hired me?" Sudeshna said, Yes, why do you question me? Don't you know that if I ask you to do it, you will certainly be safe? Now take this and return with my victuals." With that she handed her an empty goblet with a lid on it. It was an order. Tearfully, as she went to Vichaka's quarters, Draupadi prayed to Surya for protection. We are told that the sun god heard her prayer, and he dispatched an invisible Rakshasa to stay at her side, and for it to protect her if need be. Vichaka was watching for her arrival, and as soon as he saw her, he came running. He exclaimed, "My long night has turned into day. You have come to be my mistress. Now make me happy. I have gold and jewels for you, and wait till you see the nice bed I've got for you." Draupadi kept her eyes averted and said, "The queen has sent me to fetch wine. Give it to me and I'll be off. She does not want to wait." Kichaka said, "Oh, she'll send another servant along. Let's not worry about that." Saying this, he caressed her arm. Draupadi trembled, and that was sufficient to throw Kichaka to the floor. Seizing her chance, Draupadi ran for it, heading for the king's court. Kichaka finally caught up with her just as she got before the king. While the king, Kanka, Ballava, and the rest of the court looked on, Kichaka seized her by the hair and threw her on the ground. He kicked her once, then the Rakshasa gave him a shove that sent him flying. Bhima dearly wanted to finish Kichaka, but he feared exposure, so they restrained themselves. Ignoring her husbands, Draupadi addressed the king. She said, "Me, the proud wife of men who could kill off this whole kingdom, was kicked by the foot of a Suta's son. How can these powerful men just sit there like eunuchs while their faithful wife is kicked? What am I to do when Virata here sees Dharma violated, an innocent woman kicked, and allows it? You do not behave like a king in this matter." Virata feebly tried to defend himself. He said, "You guys were fighting before you came out here. How could I know what happened then?" The author makes it clear that Vichaka and Virata were on their own in this conflict. It says the whole court took Draupadi's side, and they marveled at her performance. Kanka, meanwhile, was biting his lip in an effort to control himself. He spoke to her like a stranger, saying, "Don't stay here. Get back to the queen's quarters. You know the wives of heroes also suffer indignities. but the obedient wives of heroes gain paradise through their obedience. I suspect your husbands are thinking now is not the right moment for vengeance. You obviously have no real understanding of time, the way you flutter around like a trollop. You have interrupted our dicing, so beat it. Your Gandharvas will make you happy." Draupadi obeyed her husband, turning to go, but before she left, she shot back. "I follow Dharma for the sake of men who are much too considerate. I guess there is no safety for a family that is headed by a gambler." She then unbraided her hair, and, her eyes bloodshot with rage, she returned to the queen's palace. Sudeshna asked her, "Who beat you like this? Why are you crying?" Draupadi replied, "I went to fetch liquor for you, and Kichaka kicked me before the eyes of the king and his court." Sudeshna said, "I'll have him killed if you like." Draupadi said, "No matter. Those whom he offended will take care of him surely enough." Draupadi then went to her room, washed up, changed her clothes, and pondered her next move. Obviously, Bhima would be her best option for getting quick satisfaction, so she waited until late that night and then snuck out to the kitchens. She found Balava alone, asleep on his cot, snoring contentedly. Quietly as she could, she tried to wake him. Draupadi soon got annoyed and scolded him. Get up! Get up! How can you lie there as if dead while that bastard who assaulted your wife still breathes?" Balava finally woke, saw his wife there, and asked, "What's the matter? What are you doing here? Is something wrong?" Exasperated, his wife even brought up the dice game again. She said, "What woman deserves pity more than Yudhishthira's wife? You know all my troubles, so why do you ask? It still burns me that I was dragged into the Kuru court and treated like a slave. What woman, born of an ancient lineage like I am, would continue living after such treatment? Only Draupadi. And I only continue to live on just to be kicked by the low-born Kichaka. Tell me, what is the point of that? Why should I go on? This lowly Sutta asked me to be his wife. This is all your brother's fault. It is because of him that I continuously suffer these outrages. We're all lords of the earth when he threw it all away out of his twisted sense of loyalty. And now he contentedly plays dice to entertain an insignificant cattlemonger." She then complained about all their respective occupations, finally coming around to the fact that she spent hours each day grinding sandalwood paste. The king and queen especially liked her workmanship, so they'd only use her preparations. Bhima then noticed her red, swollen, and calloused hands, and he began to weep, holding her hands to his face. He said, "I would have wrought great slaughter in Virata's court had Yudhishthira not restrained me. I too suffer continuously because I have not yet avenged your many insults. But please do not destroy our Dharma. I'm afraid that if my brothers heard you talk like this, they would do something crazy. We have only a month and a half to go here, so please hang in there. When this year is up, you shall be a queen again." Choking back her tears, she said, "These tears and complaints are only because of my suffering, not to censure the king. But the time has come, my husband, for Kichaka to end his life. The queen constantly worries that she may lose her husband to me, and Kichaka plays on this fear. This man has now crossed the line, and he must die. I tell you that if tomorrow the sun rises on this man and he's still alive, I shall mix poison and drink it. It will be the only way I could protect my virtue if you will not protect me." Bhima wept and said, "I'll do it. Today I shall butcher Kichaka and his kin. Make a tryst with him and meet at the dance pavilion after dark. There I shall introduce him to his ancient grandfathers." The pair spent the rest of the night together, giving each other what comfort they could. At dawn the following morning, Kichaka sought out Draupadi. He bragged to her that he had kicked her right before the king, but they had not done anything about it. He said news of this had spread among the Matsyas, that Virata was afraid of him, and that he was the real king of the realm. He said, "I am the real lord of the Matsyas, and I shall be your slave. I will give you slaves and gold. What do you say? Let's get together." She replied, "I shall meet you tonight, but I have one condition. Do not let anyone know about this, lest the glorious Gandharvas find out. You must promise to keep this secret." The smitten Kichaka agreed to everything, and the plan was made for them to meet at the dance pavilion under the cover of darkness. As Kichaka happily prepared for this evening's assignation, Draupadi went straight to the kitchens, where she and Bhima secretly met up. She told her husband all that had been arranged, and Bhima grew happier than he'd been in years. He promised Draupadi, "Thank you for such wonderful news. I swear to you by my brothers and my Dharma that I will kill Kichaka tonight. Whether publicly or in secret, I will crush his head like an egg." He went on, "If I get found out, I'll kill the whole race of the Matsyas. Then I'll go on and kill Duryodhana, and let Kunti's son Yudhishthira keep serving Virata, if that's what he wants." Bhima was obviously getting a little too excited, so Draupadi calmed him down. She said, now, just keep to the plan and kill him quietly. As darkness fell, Bhima went to the pavilion and hid himself in the shadows. Not much later, the love-crazed Kichaka arrived. In the complete darkness, he found his way to the couch where Bhima was seated. Kichaka caressed Bhima's arm and said, "I have brought you costly gifts and have been thinking only of you." Bhimasena replied, "How fortunate that you are so wealthy and so handsome. Now I will caress you like you've never been caressed." Laughing, Bhima grabbed Kichaka by his scented and curled hair. Kichaka was no slouch, however, and he quickly figured out he was in a fight and broke his opponent's hold. The two men were well matched, and the pavilion was nearly knocked down by their blows. Finally, Bhimasena got Kichaka in a deadly hold and squeezed him until he passed out. While Kichaka was still breathing, Bhima roared with fury and then jammed Kichaka's arms, legs, and head into his torso like a meat turtle. Meanwhile, Draupadi had been standing in the shadows, watching Kichaka's downfall. So Bhima carried this vile meatball to her and placed it at her feet. Bhima let out a roar of primitive triumph and then slipped away to clean up and return to his post. Draupadi came out of the pavilion and happily informed the palace guard that her Gandharva husbands had taken their revenge. The guards, in their hundreds, all filed through the dance hall to look at the martial meatball. They marveled at the primal violence and assumed that only a Gandharva would take that sort of revenge. The next to come rushing to the scene were Kichaka's kinsmen. They saw what had been done to their patron, and noticed Draupadi standing proudly nearby, and they grew enraged. They said, "This whore is the cause of his death. Let her burn on his funeral pyre, so he may at least enjoy her in the next world." They tied up Draupadi and got the king's permission to immolate her along with the marshal. With Virata's complicity, the Kichaka clan carried Draupadi off to the cremation grounds. As they picked her up, she yelled, "Jaya, Jayanta, Vijaya, Jayat Sena, Jayat Bala, the Suttas are taking me away." Bhima heard her call, and in his rage he grew larger, Hulk-like, until his clothes broke open. In a fury he uprooted a tall banyan tree and chased after the Upa-Kichakas. When the clansmen saw him, they thought he was the avenging Gandharva, and they scattered, leaving Draupadi free to go. This wasn't enough for Bhima. He needed blood, so he chased down about 100 of them and smashed them with his tree trunk. He then ran to Draupadi and helped the weeping woman to unbind her arms. He said, "There lie slaughtered 105 of the men who molested you. Now go back to town, you are safe now. I will return to Virata's kitchen by a different road." Word quickly spread of the Gandharva's revenge, so the menfolk of the kingdom became terrified of Draupadi. As she entered the palace, men hid in fear, lest they offend her husbands in some way. They complained to the king, who was also afraid of her. Virata was also worried that his chambermaid had managed to destroy his entire Department of Defense, and his kingdom was now open to invasion. Virata was scared of her, so he had his queen talk to Draupadi. Sudeshna begged her to find a job elsewhere, or at least get out of the kingdom. Draupadi replied, "Please let the king allow me just 13 days more. At that point, my Gandharva husbands will have finished up their business, and will be moving on. Have no doubt that they will reward you for your forbearance." That's all for now. Next time we'll see the fallout from Kichaka's death at home and abroad. News of the coup will reach the court at Hastinapur, and Duryodhana's search for the Pandavas will heat up to a fever pitch. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 46, The Cattle Raid. Last time we started Book 4, the Book of Virata. The book is named after the king of the Matsyas, Virata, who unwittingly hosted the Pandavas during their year of hiding. We managed to cover that entire year in a single episode. Not much really happened during that year until the final month of their exile. At that point, Virata's marshal and brother-in-law, Kichaka, became infatuated with the queen's hairdresser, Draupadi. He took his obsession so far as to make a rather violent pass at her. Lest her honor be questioned or sullied in any way, Bhima made short work of the odious Sutta. By the end of this incident, the menfolk of the kingdom were all terrified of Draupadi and her supernatural husbands. Virata was so scared he needed his wife to beg Draupadi to please leave the kingdom. The story ends with Draupadi promising to go in just 13 more days. The next chapter, called The Cattle Raid, begins with a discussion of the political fallout stemming from Kichaka's murder. Among the Matsyas, we are told that the commoners were glad to be rid of Kichaka's oppressive relatives, who used their patron status at court to dominate the commoners. Prospects were not nearly so good abroad. It was clear to Virata's neighbors that Kichaka's generalship was all that protected the Matsyas from invasion. So as soon as news of his death spread, the neighboring clan of Trigartas saw an opportunity to strike. It appears that the Trigartas were tributaries or clients of Hastinapur, because their king, Susharman, went to the Kurus for permission to raid the Matsyas' cattle. The scene cuts over to the Kaurava court, where Duryodhana is desperately seeking out the Pandavas. The rules of the game were that if the Pandavas were found out during the year of hiding, they would resume their exile for another 12 years. Presumably because of Dharma's boon, the Kaurava spies were unable to find them anywhere. In fact, they had disappeared so completely that Karna suspected they must have died. Thus, with great frustration, Duryodhana sent out his spies one last time before the year came to a close. Meanwhile, Susharman came in person to the Kuru court. He reported the death of Kichaka. Apparently, the Matsyas and Trigartas had been feuding for generations, but Kichaka's leadership had given the Matsyas the upper hand. Now, with Kichaka dead, Susharman saw an opportunity. He complained to Duryodhana that the Matsyas had invaded his territories and had taken their cattle. Now was the time to strike back. Besides, Virata had 200,000 head of cattle just waiting to be herded away. Karna was pretty sick of sitting around worrying about the Pandavas, so he jumped at the chance for glory. He said, "Forget about the Pandavas. How many cattle or acres of land do they control? Let's go win some glory at Virata's expense." King Duryodhana accepted Karna's proposal, and they planned a double attack on the Matsyas. Susharman would begin the offensive with a diversionary maneuver, while the Kurus would lead the main force straight for the capital. Susharman's army marched first, heading south to raid Virata's cattle-rich borderlands. Duryodhana marched his army one day later. Vaisampayana says that this was the very day that the Pandavas' 13-year term of exile came to an end. Meanwhile, back at Virata's palace, news of his worst fears arrived from the north. The Trigartas had invaded and were stealing the king's cattle. Virata prepared for war. He summoned his army and even recruited Kanka, Ballava, and the twins to don armor and fight for him. Leaving the son Uttara to mind the womenfolk while they were away, Virata and the 4 Pandavas set off to defend the kingdom. When the Matsya army reached the frontier, they observed that Susharman was doing more of a raid than an invasion. The Trigartas had stolen tens of thousands of cattle and were trying to escape with the herds. Thus encumbered, Susharman's army was attacked by Virata. As in most of these wars, the fight largely boiled down to a duel between the two kings. Virata and Susharman fought each other valiantly, but ultimately Susharman got the upper hand and even managed to take Virata prisoner. As soon as they saw their leader taken, Virata's army fell into disarray. Yudhishthira saw his chance to repay Virata's hospitality and ordered Bhima to rescue the king. Bhima was only too happy to help, and he grabbed a tree trunk and started to uproot it for a weapon. Yudhishthira stopped him, saying only Bhima was famous for fighting with trees, so he'd better use a more human weapon, like a club. Bhima agreeably consented, and he took up a cudgel and set out for Susharman. The brothers rallied their hesitating forces and led them into a renewed offensive. Yudhishthira's arrows took down Susharman's horses and driver, while Bhima squared off with his opponent. In the melee, Virata managed to escape and took up a cudgel and rejoined the fight. Soon, Bhima had Susharman subdued. Now it was the Trigarta king taken captive. With their king and champion thus defeated, it was the Trigarta army's turn to fall into disarray. The troops began to scatter, and Virata's men rounded up the stolen cattle and led them back to their pens. Virata was delighted with this outcome, and even offered to resign the throne in favor of the Pandavas. Whether he really meant it or not, Kanka declined the honor, only recommending that the king send news of his triumph back to the capital. Virata ordered jewels and honors to be heaped on the Pandavas, and sent runners to the capital to prepare for a triumphal entry. Things weren't going so well back at the palace, however. As soon as the cream of Virata's army had left the capital, news came of a second, larger invading force coming from the east and headed straight for the city. This was the Kaurava army, led by Duryodhana, Karna, Bhishma, Drona, and Kripa. Messengers reported that the Kurus had already taken 60,000 head of cattle and were marching on the city. It seems that Crown Prince Uttara was more of a lover than a fighter, but he put on a brave face and said, "I shall certainly lead our forces to victory, but I don't have a charioteer worthy of my abilities. If I find such an expert, then I shall surely ride to victory. I will sow panic in the hearts of the enemy and shall return with our cattle forthwith. By the time I'm done with them, they'll be running for home and wondering if they had just encountered Arjun the Terrifier himself. If I only had a good driver." All this boasting was done for the benefit of the palace women, since all the men had left for war. Draupadi was among them, and she was more than a little annoyed at this snot-nose comparing himself to Dhananjaya. Still maintaining their cover story, Draupadi modestly confided in the prince that his sister's dance teacher had once been Arjun's own charioteer and suggested Brihanala be given the job. The boy liked the idea and sent his sister to fetch the hermaphrodite. Brihanala also maintained his cover and behaved like a giggling schoolgirl as she put on chainmail upside down. The girls asked Brihanala to come back with colorful ribbons from the fallen soldiers so they could make party decorations. Brihanala was happy to comply, anything for the chance to go to war again. She happily called out to the women, promising to bring back some beautiful silks from the battlefield. As the pair drove off toward the invading army, Uttara bragged to Brihanala how he would soon enough chase off the Kurus and retrieve the cattle. Once they got close enough to see the vast invading army, the prince began to lose his nerve. He saw the opposing army like a vast moving forest, and led by the greatest heroes of Hastinapur, and Uttara began having second thoughts. He said to Brihanala, "Slow down, not so fast. Just look at these guys. I don't think I should be messing around with them. I think I've crapped my pants." Brihanala did not slow their pace, however. She said, "We can't turn back now. What about all those boasts you made at court? How could you face them again? I too made promises, so I will not turn back." Uttara said, "Screw it, I'm out of here. They can keep the cattle, and let them have the kingdom too. There's just a pair of us facing a huge army. It would be suicidal to continue with this." The boy didn't wait for his charioteer's reply. He just jumped off the back of the chariot and ran for it. Brihanala tied the reins and ran to catch the prince, her long braid trailing behind her. The sharp-eyed Kurus witnessed the whole scene from the distance and laughed at the boy, who seemed to be running from his nurse. The more perceptive among them soon stifled their giggles. They noticed the energetic stride and spectacular build of this eunuch, and could only think that they had spotted Arjun in disguise. The boy might be a coward, but who else other than Arjun would be so bold as to lead a single chariot against an army? Had they finally discovered the Pandavas' hiding place? Meanwhile, Brihanala finally caught up with the boy and dragged him back to the car. The boy wailed and cried the whole way, offering Brihanala gold coins if she'd only let him go. Arjun laughed at the boy and said, "There's going to be a battle, so if you aren't willing to fight, then you drive the horses. I will protect you by the force of arms." The prince meekly complied, and Arjun had him turn the chariot toward the cremation grounds. While the Kuru army watched the pair heading out to retrieve Arjun's weapons, a hot, dry wind kicked up, the sun went dim, and jackals cried out in the distance. The wise men among the Kurus read the signs and said, "Everyone prepare your troops. The omens bespeak great bloodshed and slaughter. There shall soon be a great battle." The boy pulled up at the tree by the cremation grounds, and Brihanala directed him to climb the tree and fetch the weapons. The boy did as he was told, and was dazzled by what he found. The weapons seemed to belong to gods, not mortals. One bow in particular looked so enormous that it didn't seem possible a human could even string it. Only then did it slowly sink in that Brihanala was no common eunuch. Arjun then revealed himself and told the boy the identities of Kanka, Ballava, Draupadi, and the twins. Uttara took great comfort in this news, and was finally prepared to drive Arjun into battle. The prince confidently drove them toward the battlefront. As they went, the boy got to thinking, and he said, "How is it that you of all people took up the guise of a eunuch for a year? Is there something wrong with you? Perhaps you are missing something anatomically?" Arjun said, "No, I was just following orders. My elder brother told me to take this disguise, so of course I obeyed him. But now our time of hiding has come to an end, and Arjun is back." Uttara was relieved to hear that his hero wasn't really a eunuch. Arjun stripped the bangles from his wrists and exchanged them for leather wrist guards. He then directed his driver to take them straight at the enemy. As they rode, Arjun plucked the string of his bow, and the thunderous roar it emitted left no doubt among the Kurus that they were facing the famous Dhananjaya himself. To reinforce his point, Arjun raised his monkey banner over the chariot and blew on his apocalyptic conch shell. He looked down and saw his driver cowering on the floor of the chariot. Arjun asked, "What's the matter? You're a Kshatriya, born for warfare. Why do you hide yourself like that? Now get up, plant your feet firmly, and hang on while I give this conch another blast." Arjun gave it another blow, twanged his bowstring a few times, and the resulting clamor raised clouds of dust and sent animals fleeing in fear in all directions. The Kuru soldiers had a difficult time controlling their horses and elephants, while commanders struggled to keep the enlisted men from running away. Duryodhana, however, was looking on the bright side. He'd discovered the Pandavas. He addressed his elders, Bhishma, Drona, and Kripa, and said, "You guys remember the rules of this arrangement. If any one of the Pandavas is found out before the 13th year is up, then they shall return to exile for another 12 years. While it is near the end of the 13th year, I don't think it is over just yet. Tell me truly, what are your calculations?" Perhaps fearing the honesty or even bias of his betters, Duryodhana then hedged a bit, saying, "Of course, this is a complicated matter, so even your calculations may not be correct." Changing the subject somewhat, possibly fearing how they might answer, he turned to Karna and asked, "What are all these great warriors doing just standing around? It seems our teachers are muddle-headed at the moment. If we want to save these cattle, shouldn't we organize a defense?" Karna was in agreement. He said, "I see that these great lords are frightened and confused, but whether that is Arjun or King Virata, I'm ready to stop them in their tracks." Karna went on for a couple of pages, bragging and boasting how he'd kick Arjun's butt and leave his banner trailing in the dirt. I'll spare you the details. Finally, Kripa got annoyed and criticized Karna. He said, "You have a one-track mind, Radeya. It's all about fighting and killing with you. Don't you realize that war is the last and worst option? In this case, you would be well advised to avoid this conflict. This guy just spent 5 years in heaven getting weapons from Shakra." Kripa continued, describing all of Arjun's military feats, which takes up another page, finally concluding, "We tricked him into peace for 13 years, but now he's like a lion sprung from a trap. He will not leave one of us alive. We are in extreme danger. We must all fight together in a defensive position if we hope to fight Arjun." Arjun must have still been quite a way off, because, amazingly, a sort of conference broke out. Now it was Drona's son Ashvathaman's turn to chime in. Ashvathaman also criticized Karna. He said, "The cattle are not won yet. Virata is not yet defeated, but Karna is boasting. Real men don't talk of their accomplishments. The Pandavas won their kingdom honestly, and they remained respectful to their elders. What Kshatriya would be content to take possession of a kingdom won by crooked dice? In what duel did you defeat Arjun, Nakula, and Sahadev, whose possessions you robbed? In what war did you take Indraprastha?" Seeing this conversation was going nowhere, Bhishma stepped in. Diplomatically, he got forgiveness and apologies from everyone concerned, and then Drona made a suggestion. He said, "I don't think Arjun would have revealed himself like this if the year had not passed. Let us have Gangeya answer Duryodhana's original question." Bhishma said, "Well, you see, first you got hours, days, and months, and then you got the lunar houses and the solar years. And over here you got the Wheel of Time with its divisions. Because of an excessive time and the deviation of the luminaries, you add 2 months for each 5 years. So if you take the 13 years with 2 additional months every 5 years, and then you carry the 2, and I calculate that to 13 years you should add 5 months and 12 days. Therefore, their term came up a few days ago. Arjun knew this, and that's why he's come out." Duryodhana whined, "I shall not give up my kingdom to the Pandavas, grandfather. Prepare for war." Knowing well his duty, Bhishma took command of the army. He ordered a quarter of their forces to return to Hastinapur, assigned another quarter to guard the cattle, and arrayed the remainder in a defensive position. He had Drona lead the center, Ashvathaman took the left, Kripa took the right, and he assigned Karna to lead the vanguard. I guess Arjun was gallantly waiting for them to get their act together, because only now that they had been arrayed for battle did he finally attack. Arjun saw arrayed before him the standards of Bhishma, Drona, Kripa, and Ashvathaman, but he wasn't interested in these. He had Prince Uttara direct the chariot toward a fleeing dust cloud to the south. It was the stolen herds, plus King Duryodhana and his guard, rushing away as fast as they could. As Arjun caught up with them, he blasted a few more notes on his horn. The cattle responded to the sound by stampeding back toward their pastures among the Matsyas. Before the Kurus could respond, Arjun was on them. Karna's brother, Sangramajit, plus a small force of lesser characters, turned to fight. After exchanging arrows of various types, Arjun succeeded in killing the whole lot. Karna, who was always angry about something, now turned to fight the killer of his brother. In this encounter, we are told that Arjun struck Karna with his arrows on the arms, legs, chest, head, and throat, and that the force of these blows propelled him away from the battlefield. Whatever happened, Karna broke from the rest of the group and fled. The poet says, "The fierce Karna Vaikartana abandoned the vanguard and fled as he burned with the Pandavas' strikes." By now, the gods and their Vamanas were gathering overhead. It says Indra was particularly interested in seeing how his divine weapons performed in an earthly conflict. In addition to the gods, the great rishis appeared among the clouds to watch the battle. Now Kripa attacked Arjun. Unwilling to even injure his opponent, Arjun fired 4 arrows each into one of Kripa's horses. As the beast reared up in pain, it made the Guru lose his footing. Arjun then shot out Kripa's bow, and then blasted off each of his guru's piece of armor, finally leaving the Brahmin in only his undershirt. When Kripa persisted in the fight, even striking Arjun with the spear, Arjun disabled him completely by killing Kripa's horses and charioteer. Kripa had to be rescued and carried away by his guards. Next, it was Drona's turn. The two traded arrows of various sorts, and soon Drona was being beaten back. He was spared defeat by the arrival of his son, Ashvatthama. Privately applauding Arjun's performance, Ashvatthama swept down on him nonetheless, affording Drona the chance to get away. While Arjun was dueling with Ashvatthama, Karna re-entered the fight. Shouting and blowing on his horn, he again attacked Arjun. Arjun rode by him and taunted him, saying, "Why did you flee the battle? Your brother was a braver man. He stuck around, but now he's dead. If you had not run away, you'd be dead too." The pair then faced off until one of Arjun's arrows pierced Karna's armor and stuck into his chest, causing him to black out. Karna's driver, seeing his lord unconscious and bleeding, raced away from the melee for a second time. Arjun then turned his wrath against the army more generally, slaughtering infantry and cavalry in droves. The death of the lesser fighters was simply a slaughter. While Arjun was thus occupied, the Kaurava generals, including Duryodhana and his brothers, mounted a counteroffensive. Ultimately, Arjun beat them all back by using his bewilderment spell. The force of this blanketed his opponents in darkness and confusion. Eventually, they all passed out from its effects. Remembering his promise to the princesses, Arjun then jumped down and started collecting colorful bits of his opponent's clothing. Arjun could have cut this whole epic short then and there by finishing off his enemies while they slept, but he just stuck to the task of stripping them. As he did this, Bhishma roused himself and attacked. Arjun just loaded his spoils, shot and killed Bhishma's horses, and rode off back to the city with the cattle and the spoils. Duryodhana came to and saw Arjun riding off in the sunset, and he complained to Bhishma, "How did you let him get past you? Your job is to kill Arjun, but you let him get away." Bhishma just laughed at him and said, "What's wrong with you? Just a minute ago, you just stood there while Arjun took your pants off. Why didn't you kill him then? The only reason you're alive now to complain is that Arjun loves his dharma and spared you. Now he's won this round. He has the cattle and he has your pants. There's nothing to do but return home and get some clean clothes." Unhappily, Duryodhana consented, and the Kuru expeditionary army headed back for Hastinapur, empty-handed. That's all for now. Next time, the rest of the Pandavas come out of their disguises, patch things up with Virata, and start making plans for their next move to win back their kingdom. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 47, The Wedding. You might be interested to know that with the last episode, we're more than halfway through the Book of Virata. This book has been much smoother sailing than the Book of the Forest. Things should stay like this on through the next book as well. I don't expect we'll get bogged down much until we get to the battle books. As for last episode, it began with the news of Kichaka's death reaching the courts of Trigarta and Hastinapur. The Trigarta king, Susharman, combined forces with the Kurus to stage a two-pronged surprise attack on Virata's cattle. I get the strong impression that there wasn't much to this kingdom besides the cattle, because it seems our author could not even remember the name of Virata's capital city. It is referred to as Virata's city many times, but is never named. Likewise, both Susharman and Duryodhana were only really interested in running off with as much cattle as possible. For Duryodhana's part, the whole expedition seemed more of a diversion to keep his mind off of his problem with finding the Pandavas while they're still in hiding. He was fortunate in that Kichaka's death drew him straight to the Pandavas' hiding place, but they were too late. The year of hiding had already expired. It is interesting that even the sagacious Bhishma had a hard time calculating the passing of 13 years. The reason for this seems to be due to the complexity of the ancient Indian calendar. At the heart of the trouble is that a solar year is not easily divided by lunar phases, nor even by Earth rotations, i.e. days. A solar year consists of 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 46 seconds. Our modern calendar glosses over the bad division by padding extra days onto each month and adding a leap year every 4 years. It isn't perfect, but our calendar can go for at least 1,000 years before it requires any recalibration. The Indian solution to this is to make each month exactly 30 days, resulting in a 360-day year. This throws the calendar off by more than 5 days each year. To recalibrate, 2 extra months are added on every 5 years. Thus, to arrive at the calculation for 13 full solar years, he determined that by the calendar, the Pandavas had to spend 13 years, 5 months, and 12 days. Bhishma's conclusion, along with the narrator and Arjun, is that the necessary time had passed, if only days before, and thus the Pandavas' exile was officially over with. You can imagine at that time that men of action had only a passing knowledge of arithmetic, so Bhishma's calculations were open for debate. At any rate, Duryodhana accepted his uncle's judgment for the moment, but declared that he will not give up his lands regardless. It is interesting that since we've started into the Book of Virata, Duryodhana is called king, seems to be the one who calls the shots, and his father Dhritarashtra is nowhere to be seen. Perhaps at some point during the exile, blind Dhritarashtra had gone into some kind of retirement. Getting back to the attack on Virata, the allies came up with a pretty good plan. They divided up, and the lesser force of Trigartas attacked first as a sort of diversionary maneuver. Their plan worked in that they managed to draw out Virata's entire fighting force, leaving the rest of the country undefended. Thus, even though the Pandavas helped turn the battle around, and they even took Susharman hostage, they were too far away to respond to the larger Kuru army that had invaded from a different direction. This left only the women and children to defend the kingdom. Fortunately, among the womenfolk was the hermaphrodite Brihanala, who volunteered to ride out with Virata's heir in sole defense of the kingdom. The Pandavas probably kept a calendar to check off the days of their exile, because Brihanala knew just the moment when she could reveal her true identity, just in time to defend the Matsyas single-handedly. Arjun retrieved his weapons from the cemetery, put Prince Uttara at the reins, and then waited for the Kurus to figure out their own battle strategy. Once the enemy was deployed, Arjun attacked. Arjun first went after the cattle, which was guarded by Duryodhana and company. Karna was the first to respond, but Arjun pretty easily sent him fleeing the battlefield. He also managed to kill Karna's half-brother, among others. Duryodhana kept a safe distance, so after Arjun had recovered the stolen cattle, he squared off with Kripa, Drona, and Ashvatthama each in turn. Arjun respectfully beat each of them in battle, but did his best to avoid injuring them physically. Karna also returned for a second try, but again he was beaten back, this time with an arrow stuck in his chest. Eventually, Arjun tired of the battle. For whatever reason, perhaps Bhima's oaths or something else, Arjun held back from just killing all their enemies right then and there and ending the epic at Book 4. Instead, he launched a weapon of bewilderment, which stunned and confused the Kaurava army. With his foes incapacitated in this way, Arjun took their shiny silks as his trophy and rode off. Only Bhishma was able to counter the effects of the spell, but Arjun had lost interest. He shot out Bhishma's horses and rode back to the palace in triumph. When the Kauravas finally woke from their stupor, they too had grown tired of the conflict and decided to return to their capital empty-handed. The story picks up with Virata making his triumphant return to his capital city, with the 4 Pandavas all in positions of honor. When he arrived, he asked where his son, the crown prince, was. His daughter, Uttara, replied, "Oh, while you were gone, some more raiders showed up on the border. It was those Kuru guys, and they came to steal our cattle. The Kurus were headed up by Bhishma, Drona, Kripa, and Karna, so we sent Uttara and the eunuch out to chase them off. He promised to bring back shiny silks." Virata was shocked at her nonchalance. He said, "Stupid girl, the Kauravas are much more dangerous than the Trigartas. But you sent your weakling brother along with the transvestite to face them? Surely my son is long dead by now." The king then immediately ordered his army to march out to intercept the invaders. He ordered the troops, "Quickly, find out whether the prince still lives. Considering that he went out with only that eunuch, his chances of survival are slim." A short while later, news arrived that all the stolen cattle had returned to their pens and that the invaders had been routed. Virata was a bit surprised to hear his son had performed so valiantly, but he ordered festivities be prepared and sent musicians to greet the victorious prince as he returned to the capital. Virata then decided he would like to celebrate with a little game of dice. Kanka was summoned to play, but he was a little reluctant. He said, "It is not wise to gamble when you are too excited. You stand in danger of losing your possessions, like King Yudhishthira once did." Virata, however, insisted on having his way. It's good to be king. As he and Kanka were thus occupied, Virata marveled at his son's valor. He said he had not realized the prince was such a great warrior. Kanka replied, "It doesn't surprise me at all. With Brihanala as his driver, I can't see how he could have possibly lost." Virata grew annoyed. He said, "How can you mention that vile eunuch in the same breath as my glorious son? Your speech is contemptuous and insolent. I shall forgive you this once, but do not speak this way again if you value your life." Yudhishthira, perhaps feeling more kingly now, continued, saying, "Look, your boy stood up against the combined forces of Bhishma, Drona, Kripa, Karna, and the king. Who but Brihanala could fight them all together?" Virata lost his temper and threw the dice at Yudhishthira, striking him square on the nose. He said, "I will not have this spoken in my presence." Yudhishthira had only one concern. The blow had drawn blood, and he moved quickly to prevent it from running on the ground. Draupadi happened to be nearby, and she knew what he was thinking. Swiftly, she seized a nearby bowl and used it to catch the blood that flowed from his injured nose. Just then, Uttara arrived, just from the battlefield, accompanied by Brihanala. An usher announced their arrival. Yudhishthira hurriedly ordered a steward to hold Brihanala back and let Uttara come to the palace alone. The author explains that Arjun had once sworn an oath that any place where Yudhishthira's blood was shed would be his enemy. Yudhishthira was afraid that if Arjun saw him bleeding, he might go berserk and kill everyone there. Thus Uttara came alone into the palace. The first thing the prince noticed was Kanka, face smeared with blood. He asked Virata, "Who beat him? Who perpetrated this crime?" Virata said, "I beat this rogue, and less than he deserved. When I praised you, he praised the eunuch." Uttara scolded his father. He said, "You have done wrong. Apologize at once before this Brahmin roasts you in his anger." Virata sobered up and apologized. Kanka said, "I've already forgiven you. I feel no anger, but if one drop of my blood had touched the ground, you would certainly have perished with your kingdom. I do not blame you, because cruelty comes easily to the powerful." When Yudhishthira had been cleaned up, Brihanala re-entered the court, having resumed her disguise. Virata then quizzed the boy, asking him how he did against the famous warriors of Hastinapur. Uttara replied honestly, giving credit to a heroic sidekick, who stepped in, defeated the crews, and then disappeared. Virata asked, "Where is this great warrior? I would like to pay him the appropriate honor for winning my cattle back." Uttara said, "This majestic son of a god has disappeared, but I reckon he'll be back in a couple of days." Even though it is unmentioned, Dharma's spell must have been in full force, because Arjun was standing right there in his transvestite costume, and no one asked any questions. Brihanala even handed out the captured robes and clothes to the palace women. None of this is stated overtly, but it appears the Pandavas were holding on to their disguise until they could come out in a more formal and proper style. This happened 3 days later. The 5 brothers took a ritual bath, dressed in white robes, and put on their royal adornments. They entered Virata's court and naturally took seats of honor equal to the king. It seems either the spell was still holding, or Virata was just an asshole, because he still hadn't figured out who these guys really were. As soon as he saw them up on the throne, the king complained, "I made you my dice master, nothing more. So why have you presumed to sit as my equal?" Arjun spoke for his brother, saying, "King, this man is worthy to sit on even Indra's throne. He was once the emperor of the world. The Kurus, as well as all the great kings of the earth, waited on him as his servants." Virata asked, "If this is Yudhishthira Kauravya, then where are his illustrious brothers?" This gave Arjun the chance to introduce his remaining brothers, and then himself. Uttara then spoke up, identifying Arjun as the hero who repelled the invading Kurus. Finally, the spell broke, and the facts sank into Virata's thick head. It seems like the first thing to enter his mind was, "Holy crap, this big guy has been living with my daughter for the past year." Fortunately, Hindu polygamy provides the perfect solution for this potential scandal. Virata decided he could make his peace, plus a valuable alliance, plus stifling any hint of scandal, by marrying his daughter Uttara to Arjun. He declared, "Let the left-handed archer accept Uttara, for he is a fitting husband." Arjun said, "I accept your daughter, but as my daughter-in-law." Virata was suspicious. He asked, "Why won't you take her as your wife?" Arjun got straight to the point. He said, "I saw your daughter in public and in private, and she confided in me like a father. But I did live with her for a full year, so suspicion is natural. But the fact remains that I have been pure, and have preserved her chastity as well. What better way to dispel suspicion than to marry her to my son Abhimanyu, who is Krishna's nephew and a great warrior?" Virata was convinced, and he agreed to the deal. Abhimanyu would marry Uttara. With this arrangement sealed, the brothers set up their base of operations at another of Virata's cities, Upaplavya. From there, they summoned their sons from Dwarka and their allies, including Drupad of Panchala, the kings of Kashi and Shibi, and of course, Krishna. It says Krishna also helped with the matter of the Pandavas' embarrassing circumstances. He brought them each a large retinue of servants and heaps of jewels to tide them over until they recovered their own. Once established with all their relatives and allies in attendance, the Pandavas presided over the marriage of Abhimanyu and Uttara, Virata's daughter. In case you've lost track of the genealogy, I should point out that Abhimanyu was Arjun's son by his second wife, Krishna's sister, Subhadra. This wedding is the final scene of the Book of Virata. We breezed through this particular parva in about 3 episodes. Our translator makes some interesting points about this particular book. Back when the Pandavas first entered their exile, Bhima suggested that the 13 years of exile could be interpreted as 13 months instead, and they could retrieve their kingdom after just 1 year. Yudhishthira rejects this interpretation and insists that they serve the full term, but Bhima has provided an interesting hint. As I mentioned earlier, the calendar of the time had 12 months of 30 days each. To correct for the solar cycle, a 13th month was added every 5 years, during which they held a big party. The Book of Virata has a bacchanalian element to it, as if it were the 13th month after a year of hardship. The brothers put on costumes, and roles are reversed with the bumbling Virata as king and the noble Pandavas playing the role of servants. While the scene involving Kichaka is deadly serious, there's also a feeling of carnival in the way he plans his infidelities. Furthermore, while we are still only on book 4 out of 18, we've actually reached the midpoint of the story. Thus, the Virata Parva represents a time for looking forward and for looking back. Draupadi's molestation before the court is a painful reminder of the incident at the dice game that set the story in motion. The story looks forward in the case of Arjun's single-handed victory over all their rivals. Looking even further to the future, we have the wedding of Abhimanyu and Uttara. Getting back to genealogies, it is Uttara's son, Parikshit, who carries the Kuru dynasty into the future. That's all for now. Next time, we'll get a fresh start on Book 5, the Book of the Effort. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, Episode 48, War by Other Means. Last time, we finished the Book of Virata, the symbolic, if not actual, midpoint of the Mahabharata. Despite the serious and tragic tone of the stories, the Book of Virata nevertheless has a carnival-esque feel to it, with the brothers wearing flamboyant disguises and the hint of marital infidelity. Arjun's coming out from his disguise was somewhat alarming. Suddenly, he revealed himself as a virile champion who had been living among the king's women for a full year. Virata was hardly going to raise a stink over it, though. What could he do in the way of punishment anyway? Arjun had just single-handedly driven off an entire army. The king's solution was to simply bury the problem. Polygamy provided the easiest way out. Make Uttara Arjun's wife, and who cares if a little premarital canoodling had taken place? For our super-virtuous Pandavas, however, this wasn't good enough. Arjun insisted he had been true to his claims and to his vows, and had never touched the girl. So Arjun came up with an even better idea. Marry the girl to his son, Abhimanyu. There was no self-respecting Hindu alive who would have an affair with the girl and then marry her to his own son. This would be an awful form of incest and would destroy the honor of the entire family. Thus, by raising the stakes like this, Arjun demonstrated his own virtue regarding his dance student Uttara. As part of this great coming out, the Pandavas set up their base of operations at Virata's second city, Upaplavya. Their main allies soon arrived, along with 2 full aksahinis. An aksahini is the equivalent of an army or division of troops which consists roughly of 22,000 elephants, 65,000 horses, and 100,000 foot soldiers. Thus the allies came prepared for war. Krishna also provided the brothers with sufficient wealth and servants to maintain their status as royal princes. The wedding itself was held at Virata's palace, and following the festivities, the allies gathered together to decide what the Pandavas' next move should be. As we've seen many times before, Krishna was the first to speak. He gave a rousing speech, rehashing the injustices perpetrated against the Pandavas, and praising their virtue and restraint in the face of such hardship. He concluded with the recommendation that an ambassador be sent to Hastinapur to find out what the Kauravas meant to do next. The next to speak was Krishna's brother Balram. Again, as we've seen him do before, Balram revealed his sympathy for the Kauravas. He agreed that they ought to send a negotiator, but he also counseled restraint. After all, he said, Yudhishthira was not completely blameless in all of this. He should have known better than to stake his kingdom, and why did he agree to play against someone so much better at the game than he? Thus, Balram agreed that negotiations were in order, but he stressed that they should be submissive and should content themselves with just half the Kuru domains and nothing more. The next to speak was a cousin of Balram's, another Vrishni called Satyaki. Satyaki called out Balram on his bias. He even suggested that Balram's words revealed the contours of his inner soul. Satyaki objected to the notion that the Pandavas must meekly beg for what was theirs by right. He even contended that it would be contrary to Dharma for Yudhishthira to beg from the man who stole his possessions. King Drupad agreed with Satyaki. He did not think the Pandavas should meekly bow to their cousin. He said, "Speaking gently to the evil-minded Duryodhana is like being kind to a donkey and rough with a cow. Neither will get you what you want." Drupad's advice was for them to negotiate from a position of strength. He suggested they summon the rest of their allies, get a troop commitment from them, and then send a worthy ambassador. He recommended sending his house priest. As for the allies they should summon, Drupad listed the names of no less than 80 kings whom he expected would join up on their side if war should break out. Krishna then wrapped up the meeting. While he did not criticize Balram, he fully endorsed Drupad's advice. He agreed that they should summon their allies and then send Drupad's priest as ambassador. Krishna then pointed out that he really was a neutral party in this matter. He regarded the Kauravas as much his kinfolk as the Pandavas. Therefore, he said that they had only come for the sake of the wedding, and now that the wedding was over, he would return to Dwarka. Thus, while Drupad and the other allies stayed at Upaplavya to commence negotiations, Krishna and his people returned home to await events. As he departed, Krishna said, "If the Kauravas make peace like they should, then great. But if, in arrogance and folly, they refuse, then after you have summoned your allies, summon us too. Then the dim-witted Duryodhana will meet his fate for having angered the Gandhava bowmen." After Drupad's priest had been credentialed and sent on his way to Hastinapur, a very famous encounter took place. I've been following the critical edition for most of this episode, but its setup for this scene is a little hard to swallow. It says Duryodhana's spies had reported to him the Pandavas' doings, and for some unexplained reason he decided to go to Dwarka to visit Krishna. Equally inexplicable, Arjun also departed for Dwarka. I checked the Ganguly version, and they do a much better job of explaining things. It says that the Pandavas had sent messengers all over India summoning their allies. Duryodhana became concerned that Krishna might respond to their call and join up his armies with the Pandavas. The Pandavas also had spies, and they discovered Duryodhana's mission, so Arjun also set out for Dwarka to make a personal appeal. Coincidentally, both men arrived at Krishna's palace at the same time. Krishna was asleep when the two cousins arrived, and Duryodhana sat at Krishna's head, while Arjun remained standing at Krishna's feet, head bowed. When Krishna woke, he saw Arjun at his feet, and then noticed Duryodhana. He greeted both and asked their business. Duryodhana replied with a laugh that they had each come for his support in the coming war, and he, Duryodhana, had gotten there first. It turns out Duryodhana was well versed in Dharma because he told Krishna that it was his duty to grant an alliance with the first person who arrives to ask. He said, "I was the first to come to you today. You know the rules, so you know what you have to do." Krishna said, "I have no doubt you got here first, but the first person I saw was Arjun. But I don't want to fight. I want to help both of you. Since Arjun arrived first, he shall choose. You may either have my army and its generals, or you may have me, unarmed, as your advisor. What shall it be?" Without a pause, Arjun selected Krishna. Duryodhana was delighted with how things turned out. He had Krishna's armies, and Krishna was out of the war. Before he left Dwarka, Duryodhana looked up Balram. Balram told Duryodhana what had been said at the wedding, and said, "For your sake I tried to restrain Krishna, but he didn't listen to me. Since I cannot bear to cross him, I too shall stay out of this conflict." The two men embraced, and Balram said, "You were born in the line of the Bharatas, which is honored by all kings. Go and wage war according to the dharma of a Kshatriya." This was like one of the happiest days of Duryodhana's life. Krishna was out of the fight, Balram sympathized with the Kauravas, and, as he departed the city, he picked up a large, well-equipped army and led it off to Hastinapur. When Duryodhana was gone, Krishna asked Arjun, "Why did you choose me when I will not be fighting?" Arjun said, "I've no doubt that you could kill them all by yourself, but so can I. No, I'm also interested in glory. You are famous throughout the world, and the glory of this war will go to you. I want a piece of that. In addition, I desperately need a good charioteer." Krishna happily agreed to be his charioteer. With this assurance, Arjun also returned home a happy man. While this was taking place, King Shalya had already responded to the Pandavas' summons, and his immense army was on the march. Duryodhana had a good spy network, so he was able to take countermeasures. What the Kauravas did was set up way stations along Salya's line of march, so each night Salya's army was provisioned and the king was generously entertained. This hospitality continued on day after day. Salya had assumed that this was Yudhishthira's doing, so he asked his host to present the man responsible for the hospitality. On cue, Duryodhana appeared. Salya did the honorable thing, thanking his host and offering him a gift, whatever he wanted. Duryodhana asked Salya to be the commander of his army. Salya replied, "Well, what else can I do? Very well." Ever true to his word, Salya then continued on to Upaplavya for his meeting with the allies. He arrived at the court, respectfully greeted the kings and princes there, and then told them what had happened and what he had promised. Yudhishthira replied gently, "You did the right thing. There really was nothing else you could do, but perhaps you could do us this one favor." Yudhishthira went on to explain that the main event in the coming war would certainly be the chariot duel between Arjun and Karna. Shalya was known as second only to Krishna at the reins, and so they expected Shalya would be asked to be Karna's driver in that final contest. "So," Yudhishthira said, "please do me this one favor. Please do what you can to throw him off his game. I know this isn't proper really to ask, but please will you do it?" Shalya said, "Sure thing, my son. Before this duel starts, I'll make fun of him and argue with him. I'll get him thoroughly distracted. After what those guys did to you, it is the least I could do to help you out." Having brought up the painful history of the Pandavas' exile, Shalya sought to comfort them, saying, "Don't fret over those bad old days. Even the gods have their share of troubles. I heard that even the king of the gods, Indra, had a bad experience along with his wife." Yudhishthira loved stories, so even though he was no longer killing time in the woods and had lots of diplomacy and strategy to work on, he still found time to listen to Shalya's story. The story, which is called The Victory of Indra, begins with a character called Tvastar Prajapati, who is described as the best of the gods and a great ascetic. Tvastar Prajapati created a three-headed son whose purpose was to spite Indra. This three-headed freak had three faces that each were busy doing things to rival Indra. One face constantly studied and recited the Vedas, the second drank wine, and the third somehow sucked up the universe. This creature was meek and self-controlled, constantly performing self-mortification and austerities. Its activities attracted Indra's attention. The god grew concerned that this thing might soon rival himself. His solution was to send temptations his way to hopefully distract him from his purpose. Indra's first attempt consisted of sending a troop of beautiful apsaras to entice him sexually. The ladies obediently did their best to tempt this creature, but to no avail. The apsaras returned to their boss empty-handed. They suggested he try Plan B. Indra said, "Screw it, I'll just nuke him." He then drew out his thunderbolt and hurled it at Tvastar's abomination. At this point, we finally get the boy's name. It says, "Hit hard by the thunderbolt, Trishiras fell dead to the ground." Somehow, even though his victim was dead, Indra began burning with a celestial fire which he could not extinguish. There happened to be a yokel nearby who was chopping wood with an axe. Indra said to him, "Quickly, man, chop off that beast's head as fast as you can." The woodcutter protested that his axe wasn't big enough to do the job. Besides, desecrating corpses was not in his job description. Indra said, "Just do what I've asked. Your axe will be magically endowed, so don't worry about it." The yokel was still reluctant to get involved in this crime scene, so he quizzed Indra some more. He asked, "Who is this who asks me to do this grisly deed?" Impatiently, Indra identified himself, and again urged him on, but the axeman had more qualms. He asked, "So, you are the great god Indra, asking me, a nobody, to butcher a three-headed freak on your behalf. Have you no shame? Aren't you concerned about having murdered a Brahmin?" Indra was probably getting pretty uncomfortable by this point. He said, "You don't worry about that. I'll do some kind of ritual that will clear my record. This guy was a serious threat, so I was acting in self-defense. But he's still causing trouble, so please get busy hacking those heads. I'll do you a favor when you're done. I'll give you one of the heads as your reward. Now, get chopping." Finally, the woodcutter obeyed the god, and he started cutting off the heads. As each head was removed, birds of various sorts flew out of their mouths and necks. When the heads were all detached, Indra was finally relieved of the burning sensation. He rewarded the woodcutter and returned to heaven, once again secure in his post as top god. Tvastar Prajapati was not nearly so content. Indra had killed his creation in cold blood. The god Rishi responded by making a second creature, a monstrous being called Vritra. Tvastar poured all his stored-up ascetic potency into making this monster as powerful as possible. When Vritra was fully formed, its master ordered it to attack Indra. What followed is described as a brutal and protracted battle between the two foes. They spare us all the details of the fight and skip to the end. Vritra opened his mouth really big and swallowed up Indra in one bite. He belched contentedly, and then there was silence. The crowd of gods who had come to watch the fight were stunned at the outcome. They were wondering whether they were supposed to make Vritra their new Indra, or perhaps the thing's creator should be elected. But then Vritra yawned. His yawn was as big as the bite that took out Indra, and Indra was able to jump out of Vritra's gullet. Still feeling beaten, Indra ran away. Hiding with his cronies and priests, they tried to work out a way to defeat this monster. As the helpless and weak of India tend to do, the gods turned to Vishnu for help and protection. Because that's his job, Vishnu agreed to help. He told Indra to arrange a peace agreement with Vritra, and Vishnu would hide out in Indra's thunderbolt, and he would take care of the rest. Indra did as he was told, and sent his priests to negotiate a peace settlement with the gruesome Asura. Vritra was taken in, but remained suspicious. His one condition for peace was that the gods all swear never to attack him, either night or day, with weapons made of wood, metal, stone, or magic, neither wet nor dry. At Vishnu's bidding, Indra and the gods agreed to these terms, and Indra was able to come out of hiding. At some point, Indra found Vritra walking on the beach at sunset. Noticing that at twilight it was neither night nor day, he figured it was an opportune moment. Looking for a legal weapon, the only thing he could find that was neither wet nor dry was the sea foam on the crests of the waves. Trusting in Vishnu, Indra used his thunderbolt to launch sea foam at the Asura as he walked on the beach. Now this was the kind of trick Vishnu loves. He transferred his spirit from Indra's weapon to the sea foam, and thus the weaponized foam did the trick. The Asura Vritra was killed. All the gods and rishis celebrated the demon's downfall, but Indra could not get it out of his mind that he had only defeated his enemies by crimes and deception. The king of the gods, Shakra, the sacker of cities, grew increasingly depressed. Finally, he allowed himself to sink into the bottom of the sea and refused to come out. It wasn't long before Indra's departure took its toll on the rest of the earth. All the clouds had disappeared and the rain ceased. Soon the rivers dried up and drought burned the land. The remaining gods and rishis began to desperately seek out a new king. It turned out the best candidate for the job was the famous ascetic King Nahusha. I guess they just assumed we would already know who this is, because we're not giving any background information on this guy. Perhaps we should already know about Nahusha, because if you've been listening carefully, his name and some of his adventures have come up before in earlier episodes. This Nahusha seems to be the same guy we met in episode 36, Bhima and the Snake. Remember, Nahusha was the snake. Back in episode 36, we met Nahusha while he was a snake. At that time, we were told that Nahusha had earned so much merit that he had been somehow elected world emperor. He became a snake when he mistreated Brahmins and even kicked Agastya. It sounds like Shalya is providing more details of how Nahusha rose to such a high status. As you'll see, we'll also get more details about his fall. Shalya said that the gods and the rishis went to Nahusha to anoint him king of heaven. Modestly, the king turned them down, saying he did not possess the power to maintain the dignity of the title. The priests assured him that they could fix that. They gave him the superpower that he could absorb the superpowers of his opponents. I think one of the characters in X-Men had this power. With this assurance, Nahusha accepted the post. Like many of our modern politicians, it says that though before he had always been virtuous, when he took Indra's post he became lustful and lecherous. He began spending all his time in the pleasure garden, hanging out with apsaras. Things got problematic when Nahusha finally got to meet Sachi, Indra's consort. As soon as he laid eyes on her, he wanted her to be his own consort. He boldly told her as much, and it sent her running to Indra's priest, Brihaspati. Brihaspati told Sachi not to worry. He said soon enough Indra will make a comeback, and Nahusha will be out of the way. All this power had clearly gone to the king's head. When he found out that Sachi wasn't interested in him, and had conspired with his priest, he angrily ordered his council to present the woman to him. Nahusha's subordinate gods all warned him that he was going too far and should leave Indra's wife alone. But the king cited precedent, showing that in the past, Indra took any woman he wanted, no questions asked. The counselors then went to Sachi and Brihaspati and apologetically conveyed the king's demands. Brihaspati recommended that the queen obey, but told her to stall for time. Sachi complied and went to Nahusha. She told him she would entertain his courtship, but begged him to allow her time to find out Indra's whereabouts. Finding her terms reasonable, the king agreed to wait a bit longer. Making use of this brief reprieve, Sachi, her priest, and the gods went to Vishnu for help. Vishnu explained that Indra was suffering due to the fact that he killed 2 Brahmins. Vishnu said Indra must first expiate his sins by performing a horse sacrifice. Following that, Nahusha must be somehow persuaded or forced to step down. He warned the gods that this might take a while yet. Sachi Indrani then prayed for assistance in finding her husband. Finally, a goddess called Whisper appeared to her and guided her to her husband. Whisper led her to a place beyond the Himalaya mountains, to something like a marsh in Siberia. There, they shrank themselves down to a microscopic size and found tiny Indra hiding in a cell in a reed stalk. Indra, feeling down on himself, asked Sachi what she was doing there. Why was she bothering him? His consort reported everything that had happened since his departure and begged him to come back. Indra agreed to the horse sacrifice, but he said he could not depose the new Indra. He simply lacked the power to do it. Indra did, however, have a plan whereby Indrani could lead Nahusha to his own downfall. Indra then went off to somehow secretly perform a horse sacrifice, while Sachi returned to heaven with her husband's plan. Indrani left straight for Nahusha. When he excitedly greeted her, she told him she was still waiting on her husband, but she had a great idea for him to display his glory. She said that while Indra rode horses, elephants, and chariots, King Nahusha should ride a vehicle undreamt of by either Vishnu nor Shiva, nor either Asuras nor Rakshasas. She said, "My lord, let all the rishis in heaven carry your palanquin. That will be awesome. Don't settle for being equal to the gods and Asuras. Use your superpower to steal theirs. Go for it, man. No one will dare stop you." Perhaps Nahusha was crafting some sort of new caste that was superior to Brahmins, because he just loved this idea. It says he rounded up all the celestial and Brahmin sages and yoked them to his chariot and had them carry him around. Sachi went back to Brihaspati and said, "Nahusha is not long for this world, so we'd better have Indra back and ready to take his old job." I guess Brihaspati ducked out of the king's priest roundup. He said, "Indeed, that vile man will not last much longer. I will make an oblation that will help us find Indra." Then Brihaspati made his fire blaze up and recited the correct spell to discover where the true king of the gods might be. Out of the flames rose Agni, the god of fire, in person. Like a genie on a mission, he flew off in a flash, searching mountains, forests, earth, and sky. After a mere instant, he was back, empty-handed. Agni said, "I cannot find the king of gods anywhere. The only place I haven't checked are the waters, because, you know, me and water don't get along too good. So what do you suggest I do now?" Brihaspati said, "Enter the waters." Agni replied, "That would destroy me. Like Kshatriyas sprang from Brahmins, iron springs from rock, fire is derived from water. Our powers vanish before our sources." Brihaspati then praised Agni at length for his vital role in the Vedic rites, and then said, "Everyone loves their mother, so enter the waters fearlessly. I'll give you a boost with my Brahmin powers." Thus assured, Agni said, "I feel better already. I'll get you chakra, I swear it." With the protection of the Brahmins, Agni entered the various bodies of water, ranging from puddles to oceans, until he finally found the lake where Indra was hiding, in the middle of a lotus fiber. He must have been feeling really, really small. I've eaten boiled lotus root, and the fibers are so small, you sometimes aren't sure they're there at all. Agni returned to Brihaspati and reported what he found. Brihaspati returned there with a company of gods, sages, and Gandharvas. The divine priest then praised Indra at length, and the reminder of his past glory caused Indra to swell up somewhat, but then he stopped. Agni asked, "What's wrong with you? Wake up, there's stuff to be done." Brihaspati added, "The human king Nahusha has taken over. He sucked the powers out of the gods and oppresses us grievously." This talk of a rival revived Indra quite a bit. He perked up and asked, "How did Nahusha rise to this rank?" As happens so often in the Mahabharata, Brihaspati recounted the whole story of Nahusha so far, in detail. He concluded, "His poisonous eye robs our powers. You must never set eyes on him. All the gods are in hiding, afraid Nahusha will emasculate them." As he was telling this story, Kubera, Yama, Soma, and Varuna arrived. They were all cheered to see Indra looking lively. Indra said to these gods, "The god King Nahusha will be hard to beat. Please promise your help in the coming fight." The gods answered, "Dread Nahusha is powerful indeed. If you succeed in beating him, we will want our share in the spoils." His back to the wall, Indra agreed to parse out his kingdom. To Kubera he gave authority over the Yakshas and their riches. To Yama he gave the underworld, and to Varuna he gave the oceans. It seems that Agni was confirmed in his share of every fire sacrifice. Having signed away this large portion of his domains, the gods held a conference to figure out how to defeat Nahusha. While they were thus occupied, the Brahmin Agastya showed up, wearing a big grin. Indra welcomed him and even washed his feet. He then asked the sage for news. Agastya said, "I wish to tell you of the downfall of the great King Nahusha, who was ousted from heaven." Lord Chakra listened to the happy news of how ill-spirited Nahusha was toppled from heaven. Agastya went on to describe how the Brahmins quickly grew tired of carrying that lout Nahusha around, so they decided to test whether he was genuinely their superior. They asked him a question about the Vedas. The question was, the mantras that are used in the sprinkling of the cows, are they authentic or not? Nahusha, cruising high on his priest-mobile, answered perfunctorily, "What? I don't know. Probably not." The sages jumped on that. They said, "Wrong. You don't know Dharma. The mantras are the real thing, and we all know that." Agastya said, "While he was arguing with the hermits, this man touched me on the head with his foot. That really pissed me off, so I cursed him to 10,000 years as a snake. Now, Thunderbolt Wielder, return to heaven and protect the worlds." Thus Indra returned to his old post as king of heaven. Shalya said, "Reunited with Indrani, the king of the gods was possessed of perfect bliss and reigned again as king. Thus it was," he continued, "that Indra and his consort found trouble and was forced to live in concealment, and so too shall you regain your kingdom." The story of the victory of Indra ends with a classic endorsement. It says that anyone who hears or recites this tale while their armies stand arrayed will be sure to triumph. Following this story, the Book of the Effort resumes with the gathering of yet more armies, including Yuyudan of the Sattvatas, Drishtaketu of the Chedis, Jayatsena of Magadha, Jarasan's son, Drupad, and Virata. In total, a force of 7 grand armies gathered in and around Upaplavya. Duryodhana did even better. His forces included Chinese and mountain tribes, Greeks and Scythians, and South Indian kings. In sum, the Kauravas totaled 11 grand armies. It says that the numbers of men were too vast to be fit in Hastinapur, and that the plains of North India were overflowing with Kauravya armies. Now, with both sides bargaining from positions of strength, the negotiations could begin. You can bet that the next few episodes will have a lot of diplomacy. That's all for now. Next time the negotiations will begin, with Drupad's priest leading an embassy to Hastinapur. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 49. Peace Talks Begin. Last time, the Pandavas met with their closest allies and made plans for their next move. While it isn't stated clearly, it seems their preliminary strategy was to build up a huge fighting force, and only then, when they were in a position to mount an offensive, did they decide to send an ambassador. Much of the Book of the Effort so far has been about the amassing of these armies on both sides of the conflict. Arjun and Duryodhana both visited Krishna in person to ask for his support. Famously, Arjun chose Krishna, unarmed and out of the fight, over Krishna's vast armies, which went over to the Kaurava side. Duryodhana won another round in the game of alliances when he surreptitiously provided lodging and entertainment for King Shalya and his army. Shalya was tricked into changing sides, but he still continued on to Upaplavya, where he reported what he had done to the Pandavas. In consolation, Shalya promised to stir up trouble with Karna to help throw him off his game. For added reassurance, Shalya also told them the story of Indra's victory. This story was also useful because it filled in more details about Nahusha and how he became a snake. Back when Nahusha explained his downfall, he said he had been a great king, but he didn't mention that he'd actually held Indra's job temporarily. The whole piece is a splendid example of Brahmin propaganda. It begins with a Brahmin who has an unexplained grudge against Indra, and he is powerful enough to conjure a being that threatens Indra's exalted status. Indra behaved according to his dharma in striking this impostor before he was strong enough to resist. But still, the king of the gods had committed the crime of killing a Brahmin, which is not allowed in any circumstance. Thus, even though Indra was acting in legitimate self-defense, he still had to suffer for this crime. Indra's triumph over the terrible Asura Vritra did nothing to allay his misery. Indra lost his mind and went into hiding. Nahusha was elected king of heaven by the general accord of both gods and the rishis. When Nahusha demurs because he lacks superpowers, it is the Brahmins who cook up a new superpower just for him. It is interesting that when the power goes to his head and he wants to exert his dominance in heaven, he expresses it by placing himself above the Brahmin caste. The resistance against Nahusha, led by Sachi, is nevertheless masterminded by the Brahmin Brihaspati. Finally, Nahusha is quite easily deposed once he offended the Brahmin Agastya. You get the impression that this god-king, who terrorized and intimidated all the gods and asuras, was as nothing compared to the puissant Agastya. The last item I'd like to point out about this story is the interesting scene where Kubera, Yama, and Varuna squeeze their own domains out of Indra in return for their help in battling Nahusha. They get to keep their spoils, even though the Brahmins ended up doing all the hard work. By the end of this, poor Indra had been thoroughly emasculated by the Brahmins. I guess it's no wonder that Shiva, another Brahmin, took over Indra's cult of worshippers within a few more centuries. When all this storytelling was done, the Pandavas had amassed 7 grand armies of troops. The Kauravas did even better, assembling 11 grand armies in total. Now, with both sides ready to fight, they opened up negotiations. The Pandavas sent King Drupad's house priest, who is so far unnamed, to the court of Hastinapur. This anonymous diplomat gave a very convincing account of the many wrongs which the Pandavas had suffered and how very reasonable they were being despite it all. They only want what had been agreed upon 13 years earlier, and to reconcile with their kin. On the other hand, they have 7 armies at the ready. He knew full well that the Kauravas outnumbered them 11-7, but with Arjun and Krishna combined on the battlefield, well, let's say it's in your best interest to come to an agreement. It was Bhishma who responded to the Brahmin's case. The old prince expressed his joy in hearing that the Pandavas had made such a quick comeback, and even more so since they desired a settlement over war. He agreed that the Pandavas had served their term, and they certainly deserved their side of the bargain. In his paternal joy, Bhishma's mind wandered to the well-being of his nephews, and he praised Arjun for his many accomplishments. In his paternal joy, Bhishma's mind wandered to the well-being of his nephews, and he praised Arjun for his many accomplishments during their exile. While he was waxing on about how great his nephew was, Karna jumped in, saying, Yes, we know all that. What's the point in talking about this over and over again? On Duryodhana's behalf, Shakuni defeated Yudhishthira at dice, and according to our agreement, they went to live in the forest. Now, for some reason, they have forgotten the agreement, and they've come back begging for land and threatening to use foreign armies if we don't give in to their demands. If it were required by his dharma, Duryodhana would give up the whole earth, but he will cede nothing in the face of threats. If the Pandavas wish to adhere to dharma, then let them return to the woods, where they shall be protected by their cousins and have nothing to fear. If, on the other hand, they want to give up their virtue and make war, then war it shall be. Bhishma replied, What are you talking about? Just a while back you were driven from the field by Arjun. If we ignore this embassy, we shall all surely be killed on the battlefield. If you recall back at the end of the Book of Virata, I mentioned that it seemed that it was Duryodhana who was calling all the shots, and that his father may possibly have been in retirement. Well, for some reason in this book, Dhritarashtra has taken back the reins of power, so it was the blind king who had the final say. Dhritarashtra's ruling was first, Karna was a ninny and should hold his tongue. He praised Bhishma's speech and continued, Bhishma Santanava has spoken for our best interests. I shall send Sanjay to negotiate with the Pandavas. The old king then dismissed Drupad's Brahmin, sending him back to his masters, and then summoned his driver and confidant, Sanjay the charioteer. I find Dhritarashtra's instructions to Sanjay a little puzzling. He began well enough, praising the Pandavas' virtue and restraint, decrying the injustices acted against them, and blaming Duryodhana and calling for peace between them. The crucial bit of instruction he left out was what were the terms for this peace. The king simply instructed Sanjay to tell them he desired peace. The scene then cuts to the Pandava camp, with Sanjay bearing Dhritarashtra's message. The charioteer inquired after the Pandava's health, to which Yudhishthira replied that they were all doing quite well. The Pandava then returned the inquiry, asking after the health of each of the Kaurava elders and counselors, the women and the 100 Kaurava brothers. He then went on, And do they recall the straight-flying arrows that flew at them from the Gandhava bow? Do they recall the defeat that befell them in the Dvaita forest, and how Bhimasena and Arjun set them free again? Surely these good deeds should not be ignored. Sanjay replied with his lord's compliments, and then recited what Dhritarashtra had said before he departed. He supplemented that speech with a laudatory speech on the virtues of peace, the evils of war, and concluded by boasting of the size of the Kuru armies and the greatness of their generals. Although I had trouble making out what Dhritarashtra's terms were, Yudhishthira figured it out right away. The old prick was suggesting that they should just go away peacefully. No land, no titles, just go away. Yudhishthira naturally took exception to this on a couple of points. He said, "What did I ever say to you of war? War is folly. We seek only the fulfillment of dharma and the common good. I think it is your king who is in need of some self-reflection. He has never experienced poverty or even inferior luxuries, yet he is asking us to restrain ourselves and live in penury. What I fail to grasp is how you guys think you can keep everything to yourselves and get away with it. The best warrior you've got is Karna, but what good has he done for you so far? You only got away with these injustices because Arjun was out of commission, but now he's back, and you would be crazy to think you could cross him and survive. You know what we've been through, yet we have forgiven all that. But now I must have my realm and my city Indraprastha. Let your master grant that." Sanjay then launched into a lengthy sermon on the evils of war and went so far as to recommend that they would be happier giving up on all their claims than to go to war with their cousins. I've always liked Sanjay, and I know he was just doing his job, but my estimation of Dhritarashtra's chauffeur dropped a few notches after this exchange. Yudhishthira cautioned Sanjay that the ways of Dharma are subtle, and a Sutta like he ought to keep away from such highfalutin topics. He deferred to Krishna to judge whether this war was dharmically permitted or not. Krishna was there, and he made a long speech to the effect that the Pandavas were justified in taking up arms if the Kauravas did not hand over their lands as promised. I'm sparing you the speechifying, which goes on for pages. When Krishna concluded, he made a nice analogy. He said the Kauravas were like a forest, and the Pandavas were like the tigers in the forest. If the tigers are removed, the forest will soon be cut down. If the forest is cut down, the tigers could not survive. Therefore, he advocated peace. But if the Kauravas refused, then there shall surely be war, and the Pandavas will be in the right. Everyone having said their piece, Sanjay made his farewells and departed for Hastinapur. I guess he was only following orders when he was being so hard on the Pandavas, because as soon as he got back and reported to the king, Sanjay really laid into the old man. He excoriated King Dhritarashtra for his past bad behavior, saying, "I blame you for the discord among the Bharatas, and the way you are going, you will surely bring about the extinction of your family." Sanjay concluded his diatribe, saying, "The chariot ride was pretty rough. I'm tired. With your leave, I shall go to bed now. Tomorrow the Kurus shall hear in the open court the message that Ajatasattu has sent." When Sanjay left, even though it was late, King Dhritarashtra sent a runner to fetch his younger brother Vidur. When Vidur arrived, Dhritarashtra said, "Sanjay has returned. He came to see me, berated me for all the bad stuff I did, and then went to bed. He said tomorrow he'll be relaying Yudhishthira's message in the assembly hall. I don't know what he's going to say, and it's making me nervous. I can't sleep. Do you have any suggestions?" Vidur replied, "Insomnia affects 3 kinds of people: those who are weak with a strong foe, those who have lost everything to a lover, and thieves. Surely you're not one of these. Probably mostly interested in just killing time, or maybe it helped him to sleep. But in any case, the king asked his brother to tell him all about Dharma and true wisdom." Old Vidur loved nothing better than to give a long sermon, even this late at night, so he commenced with a dense lecture on virtue and good behavior, occasionally slipping in references to the Pandavas' dilemma. This goes on for pages. If someone were to extract all of Vidur's advice and wisdom from this epic, it would certainly make a good-sized book in itself. Dhritarashtra kept Vidur talking all night, sometimes priming the pump with questions, such as which lineage of Brahmins was superior. By daybreak, Dhritarashtra must have run out of questions, because he just asked, "Is there anything else you haven't mentioned? I'd love to hear it." Vidur must have gotten a little punch-drunk by then, because he brought up the name of what he called the ancient and eternal youth, Sanat Sujata. Vidur said, "Sanat Sujata has proclaimed that there is no death. He, the foremost of the spirits, can tell you these great secrets." The king asked, "Then why don't you just tell me now what he has to say?" Vidur reminded his brother that he'd been born of a Shudra serving girl, and thus he did not feel worthy of passing on this spiritual knowledge. Dhritarashtra replied, "Then tell me, brother, how may I hear this message here and now?" What happens next is a little unclear. The critical edition says that Vidura thought of Sanat Sujata, and then The critical edition just says that Vidura thought of Sanat Sujata, and then Sanat Sujata began speaking with Dhritarashtra. It makes me think that maybe Vidura was some kind of spirit channeler or medium, and it was he speaking for the spirit of the immortal sage. As usual, Ganguly provides more details, however spurious, to explain this. In that version, it says that Vidura basically summoned the rishi with his mind, and the sage appeared before them to make his conversation. I still like the former interpretation, because once Sanat Sujata began speaking, Vidura stopped. We don't hear from Vidura for the rest of the session. I know that spirit channels in the West go back to ancient times, but this may be the first reference to the practice in India that I have ever heard of. I wonder if there's a tradition of that sort in Hindu practice. Regardless, the dialogue between Dhritarashtra and the immortal commenced. If Vidura's previous lecture was dense, the spirit's teachings were beyond dense. So dense, in fact, that the meaning was somehow squeezed out of it. Frankly, I can't make much sense of any of it, and it goes on for pages. In case you don't believe me, here's a sample. Dhritarashtra said to him, "Sanat Sujata, they tell me that you teach there is no such thing as death, yet the gods and asuras fought hard to attain freedom from death. So which is true?" The sage replied, "Some say that immortality is won by rituals. Others say there is no death at all. I tell you that the death that the sages believe in is folly. I say to you that distraction is death, and not to be distraught is to live forever. Yet death is no tiger that eats people. No shape is ever perceived of death. Some say Yama is death. Others say it is someone else. But non-death is study sunk in the soul. The God holds sway in the world of the fathers, being safe to the safe, unsafe to the unsafe." It goes on like this for pages. It makes me wonder, what good is being immortal if you're also senile? Every once in a while, he nearly starts making sense, but then I lose the meaning again. Perhaps it is just too deep for me. In any case, the dialogue went on like this for the rest of the night. The next morning, the court gathered to hear Sanjay deliver the Pandava's message. I'll cut it off there. Next time, we'll find out what kind of olive branch Yudhishthira is willing to extend to his cousins. When negotiations begin to break down, Krishna steps in as the Pandava's new ambassador. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 50, The Kauravas React. Last time, the peace negotiations began. King Drupad's priest traveled to the court of the Kauravas, and Dhritarashtra's driver Sanjay reciprocated by visiting the Pandava camp at Upaplavya. The two sides both took a hard line, but of course the Pandavas were in the right. King Dhritarashtra proposed that his nephews simply go away and don't make trouble, while the Pandavas asked for just the terms of the dice game, that they get their throne, capital at Indraprastha, and their former lands. It is clear that Dhritarashtra took this hard line because he knew that Duryodhana would accept nothing less. We can also tell that he was pretty torn up about it as well. The king complained about feeling hot and jittery and unable to sleep. It also seems like he was interested in a little self-flagellation, because he summoned Vidura to talk with him through the night. He must have known that his scrupulous brother would chastise him over his bad intentions. The king's vigil lasted all night, and the following morning he attended court where Sanjay was expected to deliver the Pandava's terms. This scene is described as the magnificent Kuru court assembled to hear Sanjay's embassy, including the great figures from the clan, Bhishma, Drona, Kripa, Ashvatthama, Vidur, Yuyutsu, Vikarna, Jayadratha, Somadatta, and even King Shalya was there. When all the kings were sitting, Sanjay rode up to the door in his chariot, as if he had just arrived from Upaplavya, still wearing his earrings. Sanjay dismounted the chariot and formally addressed the court. He declared, "Kauravas, know that I have come back from the Pandavas. The sons of Pandu salute you each according to age. Now, princes, listen to what I have to say, now that I have spoken with the Pandavas." Sanjay began with the message Arjun had for his cousin Duryodhana. While Arjun's message was quite wordy, the meaning was simple. He essentially told Duryodhana that if he wants to fight over this, then bring it on. Duryodhana's choice amounted to either concede to their demands and keep half of what he's got now, or he can fight and lose everything. Those were really the only two options. Of course, in epic style, Arjun was able to drag out this message into pages of hyperbole. He literally names each of the major and minor warriors on the Pandava side and detailed how they each would defeat their enemies. When he got around to describing Krishna, he went on for pages reminding us of Vasudev's past victories. Finally, Arjun's message concluded, saying, Yudhishthira and Krishna are already considering this battle over, with our side victorious. As for me, when I clear my mind, I can well see the shape of the future. My ancient vision is still unimpaired, and what I see is that the Dhritarashtra's will surely die in this war. When Sanjay was done delivering Arjun's threats, Bhishma spoke up, reminding the court of Arjun and Krishna's true identity, that of Nar-Narayan. He said, Once upon a time, Brihaspati, Indra, the gods, sages, and asuras were all waiting on Brahma, bowing and scraping in his august presence, when a pair of divine ascetics came wandering by. They did not pay any attention to these great lords, yet as they passed, these divine beings sensed their power draining out of them. Brihaspati questioned Brahma, asking who these guys were. Brahma answered, These two ascetics are called Nar and Narayan. Made strong by their austerities, the pair bring joy to the worlds and strike fear in the asuras. Bhishma continued. Hearing this, Indra went to the pair and asked for their help in fighting the asuras. With their help, the gods were able to vanquish their ancient enemies and establish their dominance over the three worlds. And now, behold, these two heroes have been reborn in our time as the warriors Vasudev and Arjun. Even though their past good deeds have won them eternal paradise, they return time and again when they are needed. Now, addressing his grandnephew Duryodhana, Bhishma said, When you see Keshava and Palguna standing together in one chariot, you'll know what I'm talking about. But then it will be too late. You'll be facing the extinction of your dynasty. I only wish it weren't so, but you have fallen away from your dharma, and the only people you listen to are that low-born son of a Suta Karna, Shakuni Sabala, and your base and evil brother Dushasan. Karna interjected, Lord Grandfather, please don't talk of me like that. I live by the dharma of a Kshatriya. What have I done that you berate me? All I ever do is for the benefit of the king and his sons. Bhishma did not even honor him with a direct reply. Instead, he spoke to the king. He pointed at Karna and said to Dhritarashtra, This fellow is constantly yammering about how he will protect you from the Pandavas. You have pinned your hopes of victory on this little son of a Suta, but what good has he done for you so far? As far as I can tell, he helped start this conflict when he insulted Draupadi, and ever since then he has been consistently routed by his foes. Karna's own brother was gallantly slain by the mighty Dhananjaya. But what did Karna do about it? Nothing. And at the time, Arjun was fighting our entire army by himself. What better could we possibly expect from Karna when Arjun next enters the fray, flanked by his brothers and with Krishna as his driver? You have built all your hopes and plans for the future on a foundation of sand, and it will soon be washed away. I say good luck to you. The Kuru's military advisor, the Brahmin Drona, then addressed the king. He seconded Bhishma's sentiments and proposed that the Kauravas come to terms with their cousins and avoid war at all costs. He concluded, I have no doubt that Arjun is capable of doing everything he's threatened and more. That man has no equal in the three worlds. Our narrator says that it was at this moment when Dhritarashtra decided to ignore the advice of his counselors that all those present lost all hope of surviving this conflict. Instead of addressing Drona's proposal, the king asked Sanjay to keep going and tell them what Yudhishthira had to say. Dhritarashtra asked, What did King Yudhishthira say when he heard of these many armies amassing against him? What does he hope to gain from this enterprise? Sanjay then waxed on endlessly about all the great and invincible heroes on the Pandava side, starting with Bhimasena and working his way down from there. He even mentioned the warrior Sikandin. So far, we've heard the name Sikandin a couple of times, but they haven't given us the whole story yet. At this point, Sanjay summarized his story as if we only needed to be reminded. So all we'll get for now is a teaser. The charioteer said, They have also mustered against you the fighter Sikandin, who, in his previous life, was the daughter of the king of Kashi and was rejected by Bhishma as his bride. She wished to assassinate Bhishma for it, so she performed dread austerities, died, and was reborn as Drupad's daughter. Rumor has it that a yaksha transformed her into a man, so now he may kill Bhishma. This is a great story, and I'd love to tell you all the details now, but we'll need to wait a couple more episodes before Bhishma decides to tell the whole story himself. Sanjay's appraisal of the Pandava heroes went on, covering the allied leaders and their many merits, until he finally came back around to Arjun, Bhima, and the Kuru's prospects. Sanjay said, Yudhishthira is as good as king of the earth, with Bhima and Arjun at his side. The Kauravas will go to their perdition if they risk a battle with them. Now the Matsyas no longer have any respect for you, nor do the Panchalas, nor Kekayas, nor Shalvayas. They have all gone over to the other side, angry as they are at the wrongs your son committed against them. Remember, I warned you back then that this would happen. Now you weep and moan about it as if you are powerless. Don't waste our time." Duryodhana finally got tired of all this talk of impotence and defeat, and he objected to his father. He said, "My king, have no fear, and do not pity us, because we are perfectly capable of defending ourselves. Besides, I do not believe they will keep up their end of the bargain. I tell you that Krishna is manipulating them. He's the puppet master, and his objective is to see us all dead, with the exception of Vidur. Currently, they have far fewer allies than we, and their armies are smaller. But if we allow them Indraprastha and its lands, they will use it as a power base from which to exterminate us. If we are to stand any chance at all, it will be to strike now, while we still outnumber them." Duryodhana also reminded them that they had some powerful heroes on their side too. Neither Bhishma, Drona, nor Kripa had been born of a mortal womb. Plus, Bhishma had the ability of choosing his time of death. Hadn't Bhishma once taken on all the kings of India in battle and defeated them all? Sanjay pointed out that Sikandin had already been assigned to take down Bhishma, while Bhima had been allotted Duryodhana and his brothers. Arjun, meanwhile, was assigned to kill Karna, Ashvatthama, Vikarna, and Jayadratha of Sind. Dhritarashtra said, "My son is a raving madman if he thinks he can come out of this fight victorious. Bhishma has a much better idea of the facts of this matter, and that is why I do not favor war with these great-spirited men." Duryodhana said, "You guys don't need to fight this war. It's fine with me if you or Drona or Sanjay don't want to fight. Karna and I are already consecrated for war, and along with Dushasan, we can take care of this ourselves. The three of us will make short work of these losers, and then I shall rule the earth. You can be sure that I will sooner lose my life, wealth, land, and titles than share power with them. We will not cede as much as one pinprick of land to them." The king then addressed the court, saying, "I'm truly sorry for all of you if you are ready to follow this fool to the realm of the dead. If you do not make peace, you will not again find peace until you have been killed by Bhima's club. When you see our magnificent armies ground into dust, then you will remember my words." Dhritarashtra then changed the subject. He turned back to Sanjay and asked, "What news of Vasudeva and Dhananjaya?" Sanjay reported that he had been invited to visit Krishna and Arjun in their personal quarters. There the pair stayed, chillin' with their wives Draupadi and Satyabhama. Sanjay said this place was quite exclusive. Not even Arjun's son Abhimanyu, nor the twins Nakul and Sahadev were allowed entry into this place. When Sanjay entered their room, he saw the pair lounging on a single couch. Krishna reclined with his feet in Arjun's lap, while Arjun's feet rested with Draupadi and Satyabhama. The pair were both intoxicated with honey wine and were anointed and smeared with sandal paste. As if in a dream, Krishna motioned for him to sit, and Sanjay noticed that the prints on Arjun's feet ran in straight lines from front to back. Sanjay said, "When I saw these two large and dark men, I was struck with great fear. These two are like Indra and Vishnu. This fool Duryodhana doesn't realize what he's up against. It was then I became convinced that Dharmaraja will prevail with these two on his side." I gave them the message you sent for them, and then Krishna made his reply. Krishna's message to the Kauravas was simple. He recommended that they get busy making their wills, begetting heirs, and settling their affairs, because they are on a date with disaster if they persist. Referring to Draupadi, Krishna said, "Ever since Krishna called upon me in her distress, I have owed her a debt, and I have waited for too long to repay it. Now that time will soon be upon us." Once again, an argument broke out between father and son about whether they should really fear Krishna's message, and then Karna made a speech. In this, Karna made a reference to the trick he played on Rama Jamadagni to attain a magical weapon. Unlike the earlier allusion to Sikandin, I cannot be sure we will get all the details later in the book, because I don't have a good index for the remaining Parvas. At this point, we'll suffice it to say that he enrolled as Parashurama's student, claiming to be a Brahmin, and the Guru only found him out after he had been granted the special Brahma head weapon. When Rama discovered the trick, he cursed Karna, saying the weapon will fail him at the moment of his greatest need. It is funny that Karna mentioned it only to downplay its significance, saying the Brahma head will work just fine when the time comes. Bhishma, having more respect for these warrior Brahmins, scoffed at this. While Arjun had been gifted piles of magical weapons, no one was offering any to Karna. Thus, to counter Arjun's natural advantages, He'd been forced to gain his magic weapons any way he could. Once by flaying his inborn armor to gain Indra's never-failing spear, and then later by lying to Parashurama in order to obtain the Brahma head bomb. Despite these sacrifices and compromises, Karna's weapons both had fatal flaws and were sure to fail him when he needed them. By now, the prickly Karna was fed up. He just couldn't get any respect from Bhishma. He announced, "You've insulted me enough. I've had it. I will not be seen on the battlefield as long as you are alive. Only once you are dead shall the world see my prowess." With that, Karna turned around in a huff and walked out of the court. Bhishma just laughed. He said, "That uppity son of a Sutta is useless for us anyway. The moment he lied to Parashurama, saying he was a Brahmin in order to get that missile, his dharma was sidetracked and his spiritual energy was exhausted. Now he's the vilest of all men." This about ended the session of the court. The lords and counselors all filed out, while Sanjay went with the king to his private quarters for a more intimate conversation. Dhritarashtra asked, "Now tell me honestly, you have seen both our army and the Pandavas. Which do you think is the better? What are our respective strengths and weaknesses?" It seems Sanjay did not feel safe talking alone to the king, because he said, "I'm afraid you'll begrudge me if I tell you truly, so I will not speak to you in private. First, summon your father and your wife, Gandhari." Divining that he was needed, Krishna, Dvaipayana, Vyasa walked in, followed by Gandhari and Duryodhana. Vyasa then addressed Sanjay, saying, Tell us, Sanjay, everything you know about the matter of Vasudeva and Arjun." Sanjay then revealed to the king that Krishna was much more than he seemed. He described Krishna's divine nature and revealed that he himself was a devotee of the Lord Krishna. Dhritarashtra quizzed Sanjay, "How do you know for sure that this guy is the real thing?" Sanjay said, "Sire, because you are lost in the darkness, you cannot see the truth. But I have learned this and much else by the strength of my devotion to the Lord. Having been purified by bhakti, I recognize Madhusudan of the 3 eons." Dhritarashtra and Gandhari were quite impressed, but Duryodhana whined, "Even if Devaki's son is the blessed Lord, as long as he is friends with Arjun, I'll have nothing to do with it." His mother and father both scolded him for his obstinacy. Vyasa ignored him, but gently encouraged the parents to preserve this interest in Krishna. Dhritarashtra asked Sanjay, "Tell me the path by which I may reach Rishikesha and find ultimate peace." Sanjay commenced to describe some elements of bhakti devotionalism. This is the first time we are given a glimpse of this new religion in the epic. He said, "Performing rites is not the way, unless you have mastered your senses. To master your senses, you must give up your attachment to worldly things. One cannot know Krishna without self-mastery." Now Dhritarashtra was convinced. He praised Krishna at length and announced that from now on he would seek refuge with the Blessed Lord. This ends the chapter called The Suing for Peace. The next chapter cuts back to the Pandavas and their allies, awaiting news back from Hastinapur. Krishna will begin to emerge as much more than just a country cousin. Thanks for listening.